Good morning, one and all. We are here together again on a Sunday morning. I want to remind everyone out there, meaning everyone, that you are all welcome from anywhere to join us live in this conversation on Sundays. My experience is the participation of it in it is a little different than the listening to it. And I know that even my own participation, I have a different perspective when I listen back through these, and can be at ease listening rather than feel I have some compelling interest that may be compelling me beyond the point of what's happening, and saying and doing things that may not quite hit the point out of the often hidden sense of obligation I think I have to the things I do. And it's interesting to listen to them because I can pick up points, and it's helped me clarify what I'm actually doing. So it's maybe suggesting you could sit in the hot seat with us, but I don't suspect the seats are hot any more than the discomfort that I have and my own ability to sit still and to notice that I have a great potential to learn things in the discomfort I experience, rather than think of it as something to get away from and run from, and that somehow I'm going to avoid it, where it seems to go wherever I take it. And to the point of this discussion, if the essence of our being is essential, then it isn't a negotiation. And it is who we are at a root, at the cause of who we are, at the source of who we are. It isn't something that we can give or take. We can think we can, and I would suggest that's where the beginning of the problems become. So some of the points we've been discussing over the last, and sort of building on over the last weeks, is that the moment is immediate. So the immediacy of the moment is always here. It's always now. It's always available. It is always within reach, always. And if that means anything, and I suspect it's a metaphor for ultimately the meaning of truth and reality, because it's ever present, it's always available, it's always in reach, it's always where we are when we are willing to admit it, and it's where we are when we are willing not to admit it. It doesn't come or go, it doesn't increase or change in size, it just simply is what it is, as it is, for all that are and all that is, everything. And as humans, we struggle with that. And we struggle with this idea of perfection, thinking that how things are now isn't perfect, because we're thinking of them in ways as to how we think they should be, how we think they might be, how we think they could be, how we think they would have been, how we think they might have been, while in fact, how they are is exactly how they are right now. And if you compare anything to itself, it's always perfect. There is no more or less in comparing something to what it is. So even in the function of comparison, comparison isn't the problem when it comes to perfection. It's making believe that the comparison isn't going to find something more or less in something else that something is compared to, which it always does. So to see it accurately begins to point out why those things occur, not because we're imperfect or it's imperfect, but because we're asking something, we're comparing something that isn't comparable to in the same way to be the thing we're comparing it to. And I would say when I think my thought should be what I'm witnessing and what's happening isn't what I'm thinking, I'm creating a conflict in thought. That's it. So the immediacy of the moment is an ever-present state that we are always in. We're always in the present. We're always now. We are always here where we are, as we are, collectively, simultaneously, with all things that are. So if that is the case where we are right now, as we are right now, with everything that is right now, there's not much more than we can have than everything. And in addiction, and the idea we're floating here is that addiction centers in the mind and how we think. Enough is never enough.
Nice to meet you.
Jana, mute.
Sorry.
Thanks. Enough is never enough in addiction. Why? Because we're trying to fill a hole that isn't empty. It's already full. It's already okay. It's already complete. It's already who we are, where we are, as we are now, always. So the immediacy of the moment makes the point that we're always in the present. And if we're always here with what we have and we don't think we should be here, that is a function of thinking. And thinking is a function of something we do as humans, not who we are. So it isn't because I don't belong here that I don't feel I belong here. It's because the thinking I'm doing that is here has no place in all that's happening, because I'm thinking of what's happening as it isn't happening rather than as it is happening. I'm just putting a layer of my own thinking over it. Now, that isn't something I can't do. It's something I do regularly, like every day. And when I start seeing that those byproducts and effects, those symptoms that are caused by that thinking are coming from my thinking, I don't have the urgent need to stop the thinking. And as a result, it's very easy not to continue. Versus the idea that I have to stop it rather than concede the fact that I keep starting it and look at what I'm starting all the time rather than the effects it's creating. Looking at the effects is an indication of what I'm starting. Starting to trace back to the present rather than thoughts about things not happening is where the source of the solution is, because there is no problem in the present except the things I think about it. It's already done. It's already complete. It's already whole. It always has been. And it's what I'm thinking about what's happening that tends to be the problem I think I'm facing. So that would be maybe 1 and 2 of the prelude here, or whatever this idea is, of starting to tamp some things down that we can discuss together today, rather than think of the things that aren't happening about our week that we think we need to come here to resolve, when in fact, if we're doing that, we're beginning to create the same problem that gives us the impression that the problem's out there somewhere rather than here now. So truth and reality are not problems. Life is not a problem. It's what I think of them, how I think of them, that is a problem. And it isn't my thinking. Thinking is something we're designed to do. Reason is something we're designed to do. It helps us navigate our human experience. Our life form, we are not living life. We are expressing life through a life form. Just like our thoughts have the potential to express truth and reality. That's the natural source of the thought's existence. So the natural potential for those thoughts is to express that truth and reality, not to conclude it. Not to think it's up to my thinking to come up to solve it so that I can then start acting better and continue to wonder why I keep acting bad. If my thoughts are doubtful because they're asking more questions, and if you think of this in relation to human history, humans have been seeking answers from the beginning. I would suggest they've been asking questions that are questionable, for us to continue to be asking them and seeking more. And what has it done? Create enormous amounts of denial about what's actually happening and what has happened and how we think of what's happened and how we think what happens keeps us from being able to think about anything other than what happened rather than what's happening now. Those are just excuses that humans have used through history. So if all that is happening now, we know all there is to know about everything right now. That's a pretty assured state of thinking. If we're thinking from an assured state of thinking, the chances are the next thought we're going to have will be more assured, coming from stability, than the next thought would be if we're listening to thoughts and creating thoughts about doubt and that are questionable, and wondering why we keep having more questions that are unanswerable. It's just sort of a sick cavalcade. And this isn't to suggest we shouldn't be asking questions or we shouldn't be doing anything that we're doing. It's to start noticing that if we're doing what we're doing, the effects of what we're doing are our experience. And it's what we're thinking, because our thinking is so immediate to our experience. There's nothing that can get closer to our experience than our thoughts. In terms of our human experience, our being nature can't be far from our thoughts because it isn't in space and time. It isn't something that's dimensional or time bound. It's simply ever present. So it can't be anything it can't be where we're not, as we can't be where we're not. So it must be where we are, as something that's always where we are. And that's our knowing nature. And to think of things material, for instance, change. People say, I hate change. Well, that means they basically hate everything in the relative universe, because everything in this universe is changing. And that's a big problem to have when you decide that you don't like change. And we can decide that, but what we're really saying is we don't like things changing from the way we like them more than they are now. That's generally what we're saying. But the underlying premise is that we don't like change. Well, if everything's always changing and we think it shouldn't be changing, that's a major battle. An impossible way to live our life form, but it's certainly possible to commit to that. And so too, then the byproducts, the anxious disorders, the metabolic disorders, the psychosis, all the different aspects of our systems are undermined by the stress we create in those sorts of thoughts. And it isn't the thoughts that we suffer, it's thinking they're true and that they're real. So righteousness becomes our source, and doubt becomes a chronic experience. And to notice that is to notice how chronically we've been disturbed about the thinking we're doing in relation to the life that we actually are in our essence. Not just our life form, our essence is actually essential to life, to existence, to all that is, everything, not just what you and I think we are, not just what we think the world is and the population is and the species is, to everything, everywhere, wherever it is. And right now, everything, everywhere is participating in an interactive interchange of what it is with everything else that is, in whatever way it's doing what it's doing right now, always. So again, going back to having everything, so we have everything. The idea that we don't have everything, and Anthony, this is something we've worked on, you and I, the idea we don't have everything is to think we're not where we are and shouldn't be where we are, when there's no other place we've ever been and there's no other place we can be. We can think we can, but it immediately causes other ideas that are faulty, flawed, untrue, that give us the impression that that's life, when in fact it's simply what we're doing in our thinking. Thinking is something humans do. It is not who we are. If we are expressing our human capacity, our human functional literate capacity, by actually reading our body language as a guidance system, we can express truth and reality because we become a channel for that. But we're not concluding it because it's never been inconclusive. It isn't up to thought to conclude it. We just intuitively, intuition is knowledge beyond reason. It means there is no reason for knowledge. It means human thinking is not the source of knowledge. It doesn't mean we can't express it, because we are actually a product of it right now, completely, no matter what we think. And when we think thinking is our source, we start thinking some pretty wonky things that give us experiences that are unstable and doubtful and disturbing and diseased and discomforting and dysfunctional naturally. It's just like if we got in the back seat of the car and yelled and swore at the car for not getting us where we wanted to go, or put water in the gas tank and wondered why the car didn't run well, or put 7 instead of 8 spark plugs in the car, or had one flat tire and tried to get where we were going and keep thinking the car's crazy. Well, driving it would be crazy. It's our choices that cause these experiences. And our discussion is about starting to act in a line with facts, because factual is actual, and starting to think in accordance with how things actually are so that we can talk about it. And I would suggest, as I witness with all the people I've ever worked with who are on this path and start opening up, that we'll all say things that go well beyond what we ever thought we knew. And before we even knew it, they're out of our mouth and in the ears of babes for the benefit of all. And we'll sit back and say, what the hell just happened? And certainly that would be a breach in the hell we're creating to begin doing things that go well beyond the limits of our own expectations and our own ideas about who we think we are in those limited ways. The limits of our own thoughts, when we think they're real, spell the doom we're afraid of facing when we begin exploring the edges of those recesses and recognizing that we've created the dune. The earth was never doomed to a horizon except to the thinking done by people who never approached it. And our opportunity, and I suspect with as many humans as there are on this planet right now, we're starting to see the weak, wobbly, dysfunctional things humans have done through time to make believe that what's happened in history and what's happened in our lives hasn't happened. To cover it up and make believe that somehow or another we're going to escape it by denying it and pretending that it didn't happen and it isn't happening. And the sum total of the present is the sum total of everything that's ever happened. So if there's any past, it's now with us. And what's good about that is there's no other place for it to be, and there's no other place to do anything about it but now. That's what we can do. And as we start and do that, as we've always done it, but align our thinking to it, we offer other humans and other people the chance to begin to recognize that that alignment is natural. It's always been our state. And we've simply been attempting to co-opt it and hijack it and pretend that we were hostage takers and we're going to get a ransom and a bounty that was greater than the fullness of life offered us in the beginning. And what is that bounty? Anxiety, stress, depression, obsession, compulsions, impulsive behavior, reactive behavior, hate, loathing, low self-esteem, all those things are based on thinking what I think is true and real. Because all of a sudden the thinking that I do about myself relies only on that thinking. And if all I'm doing is thinking from a place that it isn't who I am a faulty, false self wondering why I'm afraid to be seen as a joke. When all I'm perpetuating is silly gestures to try to make my appearance look better than it actually is, because I know inside there's nothing there worth anything to promote. Self-consciousness is described as an undue concern over appearance. Isn't that odd that a self that's conscious, which you'd think would be the most elevated state of being in the universe. Santiago, you got to mute. If consciousness is the elevated state of knowing and the universe and everything beyond it, and self-consciousness means an undue regard for how I appear, it must be, I'm pretty embarrassed about the ideas I have about who I think I am. And so I act sheepishly. I don't speak well in public. Why? I'm afraid being seen, I'm going to be exposed. Those things become, I remember in college, they said the last class everybody took was public speaking because it was so dreadful. Because I'm hiding out only with people that get me, that think like me, who are sick like me. I imagine cyclical applies to sick thinking chronically. So the relief is generally in laughter, in a sense of freedom, and a sense of relief of the compression from the concentration of thoughts on things that don't exist, thinking they're all that exist, thinking they're the only thing I can do. Thinking is going to solve the problem, when if I'm doubtful in the thinking I'm doing, and I take the next step, there's a pretty good chance that step's going to be doubtful too, because it's following in line with the doubt I've planted. So the seeds of my thought continue the thought. As I begin to notice what I'm doing and recognize my thoughts are just thoughts. They are imagined. They are just images. They are reflections of ideas. They are ideas reflecting on themselves when I'm looking at them as who I think I am, rather than just simply things I have that I can do to consider things. And as my consideration starts considering things as they are, I begin having a greater sense of awareness and think it's some strange thing because I've been so clueless in my own lack of doing that I think my normal state is this numb, disconnected, desensitized, cool appearance that I promote. And I realized many years back that cool is what people are about 20 minutes after their body dies. Because by then the blood stopped pumping and the 98-degree oven is no longer working and the body's cool quickly. So to be cool And to think that's a goal is to claim death is the goal. And we are dealing with an all-time high suicide rate right now. And addiction and all the compulsions that we're witnessing, all the different drugs and the sophistication of the drugs to be causing deaths at the rate they are today, fentanyl and meth, all the things that are happening are good indications that we've always been heading in that direction. We've just perfected it better than ever to have overdoses now happening at the rate that they are and call them accidental, as though people drinking poison shouldn't expect some consequence that would not be healthy. It is a failure of society, and it is a failure of each of us to think of things in terms that we can present them as nice when they are not nice at all, because it's not honest to look at things that are disturbing and to not see them as disturbing. And if I'm not disturbed when I'm seeing things that are disturbing, there is something psychopathic about my thinking, because it's maligned, maladaptive, maladjusted. And the fine tuning is noticing that everything is in perfect tune. Everything is in perfect harmony. Everything is doing what it's doing right now. And I can think so or not, but my choices in that regard is what causes my experience to seemingly contract and get tighter and create pressure. And as a result, ironically, inflammation in the body, which is one of the major causes of disease of the body. It's a manifestation of the tension I create. I can make those choices. I'm free to make those. I am not bound to make any of them. I am not required to make any of them. I am absolutely free. And to freely choose those things as though they're the only thing I can do is an indication that I've got a very sick compilation of thoughts going on in my own experience that I'm creating. Not happening to me, not a curse, not some pre-existing condition. If I can make it worse, I can make it better. If the things I can't control, like my genes and all that stuff, I have no control over, then that is not what we're talking about. We're talking about the things we choose. And to start looking at it accurately starts to allow the things that we think we have no control over to get better, because they aren't going to be subjected to the kind of anxiety and stress that we typically create in that kind of conflicted thinking. So that may be enough out of me, but I doubt it. So I welcome everyone here. And I, again, want to mention to everyone out there, we know, you know. If we know, you know. If there is knowledge in the universe that's absolute, you know that knowledge. And you can think you don't as long as you want. And we don't want you to stop, because you'll continue to experience things that will confirm what we're talking about are accurate enough to maybe pay attention to if you're interested. And I would say if you're listening, there must be some interest. So we welcome you. And we also, on the other suggestion that I opened with, welcome you to join us on Sundays if you'd like. And all I need is an email to the contact number under the, I think, contact@mentalobsession.com. We'll send you a link, and then you can join us from anywhere, which is a pretty good indication that our interconnectedness exists for us to have created the technology as a metaphor for a telepathic interconnected nature that we've always had. We're starting to function on that level. So rather than dysfunction by promoting bad information, we're functioning on the basis of actually promoting functional information to begin to look at what we all share as something that is not discriminate, that is not inequitable, that is not distinguishable, but something that we all absolutely all share collectively, no matter color, race, place, time, none of it has any bearing on this. Nothing. There is no discrimination here whatsoever. It does not matter what you think, you qualify, and you know you know. I will reassure you that. You can think you don't, but the more you think about it, the more you'll see the havoc you create by thinking that. And simply knowing that you know and letting me mention that to you gives you a chance to start actually contesting with your own thoughts and see that the contest is no contest at all, because you can't win the idea that you can create reality and truth. It's already in place. We're all a part of it. If we weren't, we wouldn't even be able to consider whether or not we should exist, why we exist, or who the hell we think we are. Literally. Couldn't even happen. So that's the brief intro that I thought I would make short, but, you know, I am prone to run on sentences. So good morning, everyone.
Morning, Jack.
I'm presuming. I don't want to put words in your mouth. Morning, Jana. Douglas, good to see you. Santiago, welcome. Now that you're back.
Thank you, Jack.
John, LA, MK. I think MK ducked out.
Glad
Maybe
to be
not.
here with you all.
Gabe, Anthony.
Morning, Jack.
Anthony, you want to talk a little bit about what we talked about?
Yeah, I was. Thanks for your intro. I've been kind of following the advice that you've been giving and slowing down a little bit. Like looking, I kind of forget what we talked about, but I know the feeling. It's just not trying to find so many problems. Usually, I try to find a problem and work on it, and I don't really. I'm in a spot where I don't really know how I'm doing, which is interesting. It's normally I know I don't like something, I need to fix that, and that gives me a direction to go on, and I feel good about that. If I just fix this problem, everything's gonna be okay. But lately, I don't know, like if I'm feeling happy or sad in a way. It's just this weird. It's kind of uncomfortable.
Well, as we talked about earlier, the idea that that's weird when you're not compelled to do something wrong shows how weird the compelling nature of doing something wrong all the time, trying to think it's right,
Yeah,
has become so normal that we think it's who we are and what we
don't
are.
want to fix something always.
Yeah. So
I think it's a wonderful place, Anthony, because then you can choose how you are gonna feel. That is
You
what
would think
we
so,
always
but
do.
it's not. Normally, I like to know that if I just had that, or if I get rid of that, or if I fix that, then everything's in it. If I had that,
No. But if you're in a place where you don't know if it's left or right,
yeah,
the good thing is you can choose to go
Yeah.
left or right.
yeah, that's
And
Santiago's
you know,
right on the button, Anthony. And peace, by the way, is what you're experiencing because you're not complicating it and thinking it's not there. And that's the natural state of existence. Peace is not full of excitement and all these other things. Neutrality is the place that Santiago is describing, where you're free to make a choice.
One thing that I have learned in the program is that when something that is no big deals, and when something that is not to my liking, something that I like happens, I turn it around by saying, "Oh, if I will have not this delayed, maybe I will be crashing and dying in the freeway." So I always find the positive to that, to prove that I have the freedom to choose, to make myself miserable,
right.
to make myself happy. So you're in a great place, Anthony. Choose whatever gives you pleasure.
In Anthony, you listening?
Yeah,
Yeah. It's not odd that it seems odd to be witnessing peace, because most of my life, what I've been witnessing is not peace. And I've thought it was normal. And that's an insane idea to make believe that the discontent and the irritability and the restlessness of an attempt to fix things that aren't broken has stopped. And I'm starting to experience you starting to experience that peace seems odd because you haven't experienced it a lot in your life. And yet it is the nature.
I think was Seneca, the guy that said that thoughts can be a great servant.
That thought can be a great servant, but not a good master.
Said that thoughts can be a great servant or can be a very demanding
master.
And
So,
Anthony,
Santiago, your phone is making a lot of noise. You must be moving around because it's very hard to hear you.
Sorry, I will come back to you when I'm in a better place. Thank you. Sorry.
Are you moving?
Yes, I'm walking, but
Yeah.
I will be in a better.
Okay. We're here. It's just hard to get your words, but I got the Seneca sentence. So to the point Santiago's making, Anthony, our thoughts are only our master when we think they're truth and reality and the only thing that we have to rely on. And my sense is, people have talked about this for centuries. Seneca is about, I believe he was one of the philosophers for Caesar, or one of the Roman emperors. I don't remember exactly, but I think that was the sort of, so he's been around for a while. But the thing that's been missed historically is this addictive nature of the thinking. Buddha talked about attachment leading to suffering.
I feel like
That
I
was
showed up
addiction.
for the parade and the parade's not there. I'm like, hey, am I early or something? Where's the parade at?
Well, my sense is, and my experience is, that starting to witness that stuff will help you decompress over things that have been compressed for a long time. And some of that witnessing is a little difficult because you're going to start seeing some of the things you've done that are so insane, and that you have a compelling habitual nature to redo that cause grief and mourning and loss. Because what I realized was that I had missed almost every moment I'd been in when it came to my thinking. And I had grieved the totality of the complete whole experience that I had been given freely, lovingly, completely, by making believe all that was happening was what I was thinking was happening. And I don't suspect there's any greater present traumatic stress that can be created on the body than that. And I don't think it's a surprise post-traumatic stress seems to be so difficult to deal with, because it's thought of as somewhere other than where we are. Thinking about the thing that stressed us now is where the impact of that stress is being caused. It isn't a year ago or 10 years ago. It may have happened back then, but what we're doing with it is still continuing now. And that's very much in line with the kid you sat next to in that original meeting we met at.
Yeah.
Remember?
Yeah.
He'd been bemoaning his mother for 17 years for something she stopped 17 years ago. And I think it became clear to him. If it didn't become clear to him, you were sitting next to him and almost fell off your chair.
Yeah.
But the point was, he'd been beating himself up over it for the whole time, and the way he was thinking about it, thinking it had nothing to do with him, when it was how he was thinking about it that he was suffering from. There's no greater immediacy in our experience than how we think of things in our human experience. The knowing nature is always there, but we don't think about it for it to be there. And when we align our thinking with it, rather than think we can oppose it, the clarity of what we've been doing is my experience. I mean, as most of you know, I had a severe panic attack. My whole body turned gray. All the fear that I'd been holding and the things I'd been doing and the way I'd been posturing myself throughout my entire life form lit up, because I was looking at it for the first time and I got to see it clearly, and my whole body turned gray. I walked out a door and a woman coming toward me, I could see her knees almost buckle. She was clearly witnessing something that she was aware of but couldn't make sense out of. And so was I. I was making some sense, but it was an overwhelming experience that again felt out of control. And I started to see how fear had bullied me into thinking that I needed to make peace with it while I was helping it grow and grow and grow and grow and grow by denying it. And to live in that way is to be hostage to my own thinking. And that's pretty insane, because the ransom is depression, anxiety, stress, disease. And that's the bonus. If that's the goal of life, that seems pretty sick. But we're doing pretty good at that. We've mastered that, to Santiago's point too, about the idea that the thinking is a bad master. It isn't the master. It isn't the source. It's just something we do. I can flap my arms the rest of my life and probably not accomplish much, but I will never be a bird.
I am in a good place. So
Good.
may I finish? Anthony, I understand you very well. because I know exactly what you are saying. It's
Yeah.
something that I experience myself. And I realize that it's because my deep belief that whatever comes to my mind, my thought, or the feeling that is the manifestation of thought in my body is what is true. And when that is what, I should pay attention to. When I realized that thoughts were just thoughts and feelings just feelings, and they were not my master,
Yeah.
that my head is to serve me, no, on the contrary, I was in an empty place. It's like, well, I don't know what to think.
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, but then I discovered that that is the place where I can decide which way to go, and do it consciously. So I think you're in a wonderful place. That is what I want to say before.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, and Santiago, that's very clear because you're describing a place where there is no doubt. So the consciousness that's always been there is being utilized in the fullness of its capacity rather than disenfranchised and dissected and fractured to try and make pieces fit that don't fit. It's just beginning to act in accordance with an assurance that we have rather than constantly acting in the face of doubt that is telling us, like you're describing, if I'm hearing you correctly, and I think what you said was pretty clear, the feelings I have that are doubtful are accurate representations of the thinking I'm doing that is doubtful. And to notice that is to say, wow, I got an incredible GPS system. I've got an onboard owner's manual that gives me perfect information all the time. And it's what I do with that information that I either benefit or suffer from. And if I benefit, everybody benefits. And if I suffer, everybody suffers in some degree. Because I'm not disconnected from everyone, no matter what I think. So I think that was beautifully said, if I reflected your point.
Well, I think my comment was much more down to earth.
Well, I'm not worried about whether we're already on Earth, so we're already down to Earth. I am doing what I can. I am doing what I can to think in terms that are not spatially bound or dimensionally bound or time bound, but start to actually just address from an absolute state of being that if things are as they are, and thank you for the humor, Santiago. If things are how they are, and it's really, what I realized when this began to occur to me is that I had lived with very little thoughts my whole life. And I had thought there was very little I could do. And in finding that peace, Anthony, one of the things that occurred to me, and I think will occur to you naturally, and I suspect occurred to Santiago as he started, was that the ideas I started imagining got bigger. And then as a result of the expansion of those ideas, all of a sudden I started to realize that I also had other limited ideas about that expansion. If you follow me. So let's say, Anthony, let's say that you always wanted to have that Maserati that you talked about.
What color?
And then all of a sudden you own a dealership.
Yeah.
Of Maserati dealership. Like I know a guy that I met when he was 31 and he built a big project in Marina del Rey that was very successful. And he went off to loved cars, and he owns the Maserati, Ferrari, all that stuff down in Newport.
Yeah.
And he was young. So it didn't occur to him that he couldn't do it. He just did it because it occurred to him and it worked. So my point is that I've normally lived down to the smallest of my thoughts. And to begin to see the absolute as something that's absolute, not just for the world and all its people and all its things, but the universe, is to begin to actually look at speaking in terms that could be and might be and are beneficial to everyone. And I would say that's our capacity. That's what we're here to do. That's what love does, gives itself away. The more that's given, the more that's given, the more that's given. It just keeps expanding on itself. Where contraction eventually comes to a single point that can't compress any further. And apparently, according to physics, that's what the Big Bang was. Everything was so compressed and so compacted. Everything in the universe, I forget what the size of it was, but it was like the size of a basketball or something, was tiny compared to what we see now as expansive, just exploded into the expanse. Because you can't go into self-centeredness and into single-dimensional thinking further and further and further without eventually facing the fact that you're trying to non-exist and actually explode in the other direction. And those explosions are often violent. But they are expansive because they are a release of that explosive energy. So it's a step in the direction of beginning to actually heal. And I'm not suggesting violence is the direction to do that. I'm suggesting that when it happens, it's doing what it can do to relieve the pressure that's caused by making believe not doing the thing that's wrong can be kept to oneself or to an idea without expanding and expanding and expanding and creating more and more tension. I know in my own experience, when I'm not honest in situations, I end up being upset about how they go. And if I track it back, I see that along the way, I thought I was doing things that were buying people off to get what I thought I wanted and how I thought it should go, when in fact, those things led to the exact thing that ended up having me explode. So there's an awareness along the way to have that explosive nature building up. And there's a lack of thinking awareness to allow it to continue and make believe it will somehow get better while it gets worse. And that's addiction. The problem becomes the solution, and the solution becomes the problem. And my suspicion is the freedom we have to think and to think of our thinking is where we either act contemptfully or freely. And I suspect Santiago was talking about the freedom, the choice, the freedom to make the choice. It's a much different experience when you don't feel condemned to make the choice because you're free to make a choice. And so it becomes virtuous and moral, and all of the things that would typically lead to health, survival, and thriving become a natural expression.
So what I'm hearing you say, if I just had the right girlfriend or the right car, then everything will be okay.
You know what's interesting?
Say that again, Anthony, please. I missed you there.
No,
say that again, Anthony.
I was just joking. I said, so what I hear you saying is if I had the right girlfriend or the right car, then everything will be okay.
Oh, yeah.
Well, but you know what's interesting about that, Anthony, is that as you begin speaking or choosing from the description that Santiago pointed out, you tend to choose people that are right. And my experience is the only people I ever chose were wrong because I had stuff to work out that I wanted to blame on them before I could actually admit my own culpability and responsibility for it. So the sick relationships are often a manifestation of our knowing that we're not giving ourselves perspective, and we need perspective. So we use other people, places, and things to create it. And I would say that's a beautiful design to be able to have that perspective. And it just turns ugly when I make believe it again that it's true rather than it's just something I'm doing to give myself the chance. And the difference, as we talked about in here, is that with those people that I use, if I'm using them to blame and fault and say it's them, I generally leave that relationship with a fuck you. And if I see that I've used them for the benefit of my own perception to see what I'm doing and what I'm seeing in them is what I'm doing, I leave saying thank you. Because I've grown and benefited from it. I've used them as an opportunity for perspective, and they have willingly offered me that. Which is very profound. If we're talking about being lost, profound would be for finding, and that would be one way of doing it. So I don't know if you all listened to Moeen's and my discussions. We've done 2 now so far. I've got one more to go with him. Moeen is creating a challenge for himself where he does 31 days, anything he wants, sugar, drugs, whatever he wants to do, 40 days off. So he's 3 years into this cycle and he's got several years to go. So he's got this experience of withdrawal and stopping and what happens when he stops and the sort of periods of time that feel like not so happy as the other periods. But he's getting a rhythm to it that's very, very clear, and you can hear him talk about it. But one of the things that came up with us, that often comes up with us here, is the question, when there's no compelling need to do anything, well, what do we do? And the old answer used to effectively been nothing, because what we were doing didn't amount to anything except repeatedly creating circumstances to help us justify the insanity we were promoting, that things shouldn't be how they are, as they are, where they are, when they are now. And the new question is, or the answer is, everything. What's possible? Everything is possible. Why? Because everything happening right now is possible. It wouldn't be happening if it were impossible, and if it's happening, it can't be impossible. So thinking about it as impossible is a function of how I'm thinking again about it, not how it is. So the greater possibility of this is that we refine a discussion that we can have with everyone, everywhere, and begin introducing a knowing self that we all share, rather than the individuation of who we think we are that seems to collide with some people, sometime, someplace, which ends up being all people, all the time, every place. Just seeing that we are witnesses to that knowing source, as all people are. We just simply have not been talking about it honestly, and as a result have not been introducing it to the irrational reason we've been using as the only thing we can do to help disband this parade of conspirators that are all in my head. You know, the thinking I do to my thinking thinks up all kinds of selves. It's not just one self. My self isn't one self. My self is made up of all the selves I have in terms of the thoughts I do about my thinking about my thinking. There's all kinds of voices in there. How many voices do I need before I start realizing there's nothing there that I'm not creating? It's like the term shit show kind of takes on a whole new meaning. So what is a waste has no value. And I would say that's why we talk so much about getting our shit together and having shit to do. Because it's bent on this idea that these things have to be done for our survival, rather than see that they're actually choices even when we think we have to do them. Even when we're sick, we're just basing our have-tos and our musts and our shalls on sick thoughts. Isn't true, isn't real, but it's actual. We're doing that. What's real is the principles. The responsibility is real. The accountability is real. The experience we're having is actual enough to represent all that we're doing in relation to all that's happening. It isn't a mystery. There are no secrets. They all leak blood, sweat, and tears, perspiration, or glee, radiance. It's interesting how much the dark stuff we want to keep to ourselves and how happy we are to express our happiness to everyone else.
It's interesting. I have this need to try to work on somebody else's problem. Even I want to know, like, okay, does anybody have a problem we can work on? Or I like to fix things.
Well, thank you, Anthony, for giving us your observatory capacity as insight. And I appreciate that.
Yeah. It's like if we're not fixing something, something's not right.
Yeah, well, you, like I, have probably used everybody in your life to try to justify what we were doing that was wrong, and thought because it was the only thing we could do, which was a lie, that the only lie there was that we had to help them. And I learned the hard way that helping people isn't always help if they're not interested in helping themselves. If they really don't have their best interest at heart, and I'm helping them, I am helping them get worse and sicker, and I am sick doing that. Doesn't help people. It's what we're doing a lot in our city right now in Los Angeles. They're paying people to languish on the street and do more drugs and wondering why things have gotten out of control. Pretty obvious. And yet it continues and it grows and the problems get worse. And they try to control it. But any problem that isn't addressed at its cause, at its source, is always going to grow, which is why people eventually overdose. The problem isn't being addressed, so the drinking, the drugs don't help it. They actually help the problem get worse because they're ignoring it. And as the problem grows, the drinking, the drugs need to increase, and eventually people overdose or kill themselves because they can't take the abuse. The bodies aren't designed to constantly be under siege. They're pretty durable. I mean, bodies have seemingly survived almost impossible attempts to kill them. Yet at a certain point, they don't. They stop. They reach that limit. And it's not a surprise. We have 5 people a week in our city dying on our streets, on the street. Some are old age, I imagine, but I can't imagine their age wasn't crippled by the activities that are going on and the bacteria that's being created and all of the filth and the conditions that are anxious and anxiety prone and filled with fear and all that stuff. Doesn't help people. It's not healthy. And I would suggest we're all participants to it. We're not exclusive to it because we're not experiencing the worst of it. We're ignoring it to think that it isn't something we're actually part of. And that's why the discussion is it's considered something for everyone because it includes everyone. And we can consider it right now for as few of us that may seem to be together. We are intimately connected to all those everyone's out there. And the better we do in this discussion, the better we are capable of expressing it. And I would say the better able we're expressing it right now in the broadest sense, in the most inclusive sense, in the totality of that sense, not some small part. And I wouldn't say that's grandiose or exaggerated. I would say it would be exaggerated and grandiose to think otherwise if this is in fact the case. The peace you're witnessing, Anthony, is what we share as our essence. Because there is no disruption in a natural, absolute state of being. None. Can't change. Just is what it is as it is now, always. And if that's the thing we share, we all know that we have that, which is exactly why we are so clearly aware of what's wrong. If there were no distinction and wrong was normal and wrong was actual, all that we ever experienced, it wouldn't be wrong. It would be right. And even in that, you can see that there's a conflict in something wrong being right. Wow. You know the swooshing email sound when the email goes off? uh,
Can I add? It's like the stabilizers of a child when we learn to ride a bike, and it's actually going. These stabilizers are actually honked onto us. They were glued onto us. It's like, get off. I've been doodling and drawing, and this is not something I'm usually doing, and it's just freeing. And in a way, even just in this space that we're sharing in this interconnection, I've been able to play and doodle, and I've looked it over there. It's like, oh, and then another idea flows and comes through, and I can add to it and contribute to it. And it's like there are other human beings out there, beings connected like this, and it's very freeing. And it's the sensibility and the safety and the security to know there's it's safe. It's safe to play.
Well, there is no risk in what never ends and never began. It's just, there's nothing. I mean, that's Course in Miracles. That's the, there's absolutely there's no risk. There's no fear. There's no doubt. There's no uncertainty. There's no instability. Perfectly stable all the time. So
it's like we've been this lie. It's like, get off me. It's like the Muppet. Get off, down.
Well, and we create images to justify the thinking we're doing by creating narratives that come with all those characters that we create in our own thinking to give it the impression that it's true. And they're literally just an act we're creating. So within sobriety, the character defects are thinking the characters that I'm playing is actually who I am. I'm King Lear, and I do not want to get off the stage, and I want everyone in the audience to begin to obey me. They've already paid to come see the show. And now I want to command them in their life and everything they do and everyone beyond them, because I think who I am is actually the part I just played in the play.
And this space here, when in the one of the lines at the end is, speak what you feel, not what we ought to say. I'm sure that's at the end. Speak what we feel, which is not what we ought to.
Yeah.
Oh, if we ought to, naughty. It's going to really shake shit up.
Well, think, Matthew, at if we're where we are and we think we shouldn't be, what do we immediately think? We should be somewhere else. Where's the one place we can't be, but anywhere other than we are? So what do we next think? We should have something else, Anthony. So what do we think? All the things that we can list that we can have to make it right, to make this place that we're already in, that we're in, right. It's already right. So what do we do? Because we're thinking it's not right in some way. And keep in mind, I came into a moment yesterday morning, curiously. Now I've been at this for a while. And my contention is it's not what we're thinking all the time that we're thinking. It's what we think we're not thinking that's really the target here. And to admit that alone, to begin to concede that, is to begin to allow us to consider the responsibility we have when we're pretty sure we have nothing to do with the thing that just happened because we don't think we had anything to do with it. When in fact, if it's happening, we have everything to do with it. And start to see intention is not what I think should happen. Intention is what happens, which shows that my thinking must be much greater than what I'm thinking. So I had a thought yesterday morning. I was getting back in my truck and I go have coffee and I walk around the marina and I sort of start the day in the fresh air and have met some people along the way, some homeless and otherwise, some brilliant people on the street. That's how I get going. I look at the boats and the seals and, the sailboats don't argue. They just kind of sway. And I had this thought getting into the truck. Something's not happening. Something should be happening. There's something missing. And I immediately thought, well, that's an interesting thought to have while everything that's happening is happening. And again, I realized that this submerged, subconscious darkness seems to hold secrets from even me as much as I do this.
Yeah.
But I could then address and say, well, that's an interesting thought to have in the midst of everything happening. And start to allow those champagne bubbles to actually rise to the surface rather than explode the bottle, and start to just pop, pop, and pop, and pop. And I suspect it isn't because I shouldn't be doing that. And if I was and thought I shouldn't be doing it, I would be doing it all the time because the fight would compel me to think the thing I can't do is the thing I have to do. And as a result, becomes the only thing I should do. It's manic and crazy. So, it passed, but it gave me a little more insight into not the depth of the problem, but the willingness of my own willingness to maintain deceit in ways that limit the ideas and capacity I have to begin to conceive of all things in all ways as they are in my thinking. It isn't reality that I'm struggling with. It's what I'm thinking about it that I'm struggling with.
How'd your rehab speaking go? You did a presentation at the rehab center, you said, right? You were the speaker?
I forget which. I did a couple this last week, but I spoke yesterday to a bunch of guys who are sober, and a friend of mine that I got sober with 35 plus, he's got a little more time than I do, but he became a therapist and works with people in recovery. And he has me come every 6 months or a year. And it isn't recovery, but he is a therapist. So he runs, most of his guys have multiple sex and all kinds of different addictions. It's not just alcohol. And so the essence of the mental obsession, which is rooted in all of the compulsive either programs or compulsions and reactive and impulsive behaviors that humans have in general, is a chance for me to talk about that openly. So it's always fun to see people react and respond and laugh, given the nature very often of developing stories around what's wrong and how people feel bad and depressed and et cetera. So my experience, Anthony, is it just gives me a chance to get better in the face of people that I'm not always aware of. And as a result, there's a bit of a challenge in it all the time. It helps me see that I have some frail thinking about my own experience. And I like to not speak past it and through it, but start to acknowledge it and sort of face that with it and come with that doubt and all those things. And I find the bigger the crowd, the more that tends to be accurate. Seems to create a little more pressure because I'm not used to it. So I haven't had the experience with it. And it shows me that I have a lot of ideas about what other people must be thinking. And if I'm worried about what other people are thinking, I'm very worried about what I'm thinking. So, but again, to Santiago's earlier point, if that present place where you're choosing begins to allow you to choose things that are gainful and useful and whole, then the question is, if I'm choosing those, why don't I choose them all? Why don't I start thinking in the biggest terms? Not because now I'm thinking only about what I can get to make up for what I think I'm missing, but what I can do on behalf of everything and everyone, everywhere, and all things, including the nature of nature, the nature of existence. And you've asked me this question before. You've said, I just don't feel like I'm doing enough. And I would say that's an accurate assessment to Santiago's point. Your feeling is an accurate assessment of thinking all you can do is something for yourself. And my sense is we're already intimately connected. There is no breach between any of us anywhere, never has been. There's enough of us now on the planet that awareness might create a critical mass a lot quicker than it did when there was 100 people on the planet roaming and living thousands of miles from each other, when they were finally able to migrate and move around far enough to accomplish that. Now, what seems to be problematic because of the numbers actually becomes a potential for a communication that could help us realize how to live in a way that's actually productive on a planet that could help everyone live together rather than some live better than others and then feel they're better off because other people are worse off, which I think is a pretty sick form of thinking, but I've done it enough to qualify. So then the question becomes, okay, like with Moeen, when he said, well, now what do we do? If there's nothing to do, he kind of felt that sense of vacancy that you're describing, Anthony. And I said, that's actually facing all possibility. You're starting to realize you have no obligation to do anything. And as a result, can do everything. Whatever can be done, we are part of to begin with. Whatever's happening, we are a part of right now. Everything, everywhere. We're a part of it. We're not separate from it. We're not alone in it. It is profound, again, because it is interested in finding rather than interested in questioning and doubt.
Well, thank you, Jack, and thank you, everybody. I gotta go. No, I don't got to go, but I am choosing to go.
Thanks, Santiago.
Happy birthday, Santiago.
Oh, thank you.
Last week or so.
I love you all.
Love you too. So interesting in contemplating some of these things, it doesn't really lead to a conversation. It can, but often the receptivity, the listening improves because the contemplation, the individual contemplation, for anyone out there listening, the fact that we're doing this in what they call real time, which by the way, real time is time for whatever it means. The fact that we're doing this here together, you are doing in the same way where you are listening right now. And that contemplative capacity is consideration. Consideration is a contemplative, awakened state of meditation. And I would say it's our constant state of awareness. And our choices are our prayers, and they are always answered by the effects we create. We may not get the things we think we want in them, but those things we're asking for, it's kind of like asking for trouble. We may or may not get them. To think they're the only things we should get is to think that that our thoughts are so true that all that should ever happen is what we thought we wanted when we originally made the decision or had the thought. So expectations are bound. When you begin to expect what happens to happen, you will never have your expectations dashed. So when you align with how things are, it's natural. So in speaking to listeners, you are where you are now. You are doing what you're doing. How you're thinking about things is how you're thinking about them. Doesn't make them wrong or right. It just has them as they are. Right and wrong doesn't come into that. So the issue here isn't to think so much about why we're doing what we're doing or how we're doing what we're doing or when we're doing what we're doing or where we're doing what we're doing, but starting to notice that we're doing what we're doing, that we're doing, that we are where we are, etc. That is a very different concession than asking questions. And what, where, when, why, how are all questions. And who are all questions. They're all going to lead to more questions if the answers aren't answered accurately. I would say that describes human history. Are we obligated? No. Will we continue? Probably. It's pretty likely that we'll continue doing what we've been doing to some degree. Can it be stopped? Absolutely. Where? Right now, right here, in its tracks. Not in the length of the tracks, but in the tracks that we are standing in right now is where it begins. That is where it ends. If I stop thinking.
I just had a breakthrough right now, too. I was thinking that's probably why I pick relationships like I do. I like people that have problems so that I can fix the problem because I like to fix problems. I never pick somebody that's perfectly healthy.
No, I have had a bad, that whole experience I had getting stabbed came from thinking I could help a guy who was psychotic and he was struggling. But I kind of bought him off by giving him things. And when I stopped giving him things because he tried to blow up one of the neighbor's cars because the guy asked him not to use the laundry, I said, I can't help you anymore. And he thought I was the then Antichrist, the enemy, the demon, the devil, whatever it was in his mind that was wrong became me. And he sought me out and tried to put an end to me. But he offered me a great beginning. So there are some things that failing at are wonderful, and part of it is learning. I don't tend to learn a lot if I don't fail. But I certainly take credit quickly.
You help people now still just from a little bit more of a distance.
Well, again, the help is dependent on whether the other person is really engaged in helping themselves. And if they're not, I'm only helping myself to the idea that I'm a big help, when in fact I'm actually hurting the person by giving them more latitude and freedom to avoid facing that moment that seems to be so critical for all of us when we're finally willing to face what's going on, because it hurts enough to finally concede that we're on the wrong path. Yeah. Rather than when we start, when we know something's wrong, we wait until that pain is the touchstone of spiritual growth, is a pretty interesting commitment we must make to denial, seeming as though it's our only source. Morning, Austin.
Good morning.
So Austin is starting a podcast. I'm going to do a little thing for him tomorrow about near-death experiences. And I think one of the conversations we've had in our conversation is about why is it that people have these miraculous sorts of awakenings and awareness when they're near death, when that condition must not be limited to near-death experiences, but it takes us, speaking of denial, it takes us facing those circumstances that are so far beyond our capacity to understand and comprehend that we actually then witness this absolute nature that is inviolable and immutable and indivisible and actual presence of presence. And I would again suggest that is our natural state right now. What we're doing in thought, giving ourselves the impression it isn't, doesn't disqualify it from being all that it is and all that it is for us and all that we are and all that is are. All it is and all that we are is that thing, whatever that source is. The only difference is it's a gift. It's something we got. It's something we were given. It's not something we created. And certainly trying to create it in thought is not the goal of thinking. So I would say those blocks we face are the blockheadedness of the thinking we do that gives us the sense that we've created obstacles so we can prove we're in charge and capable, and someday we can block out everything. And to create complete darkness is basically a death wish, suicidal tendency, suicidal ideation, all those things that come with this idea of compulsions and addiction going off the rails and thinking somehow the most daring thing I can do is the safest thing I can do because it's going to finally prove who I really am and all that kind of stuff. So if we're there now and not witnessing it, we are witnessing the denial that comes with the ideas we have about things that are not here now, when all that is here now with us. One of the most fundamental forms of communication that we have, aside from the sort of interconnectedness, which would be an absolute that it isn't spoken, is conversation and language. And I would say talking about these things accurately opens doors in language to ideas because our language is a byproduct of our thinking.
Did you just say kind of interconnectedness?
I may have been referring to the thinking we're doing that seems to be missing some of it, but yeah.
I like that word, kind of.
Well, sometimes it's a little easier to swallow things in small chunks, but I don't think it's honest enough to address things that are absolute as part-time and sometimes in little bits to make it easier to swallow. Because if I'm trying to make things easier to swallow, I'm forcing somebody to choke. that's probably not the point. You know, there's a potential for that. So talking openly and honestly, and you know, we've talked about this before also, watch your feelings, you'll see your thoughts. Watch your words, you'll see your thoughts. Watch your interactions with other people, you'll see what you're thinking about them. Listen to other people and you'll start seeing, to any degree you're seeing this clearly, how you're thinking about what they're saying in relation to what you think, rather than listening to what they're saying in relation to what they're saying. So as you remember, Anthony, where we met, I talked about early on in the discussion that we are always present. There is no other place to be. The present is the nature of existence. There is no past or future, but in the thoughts of the present. So we're thinking presently about the past. We're always thinking presently about the future, whenever we are anyhow. I'm not saying we're always doing it, but to the degree we're doing it, we're always doing it from the present, which means the present is always present. And what was one of the first things that came out of them? And this happens every time.
Yeah.
The first guys that shared that week, 20 minutes into that conversation, he said, yeah, you're reminding me that I need to work on being in the present.
Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with that. It's just an indication that our thinking is so obsessive that we think all we're hearing is what we're thinking we're hearing. And we're not noticing that. So to talk about it is to give anyone listening a chance, and they already know it, but they may just not think they know it. And as a result of living in an environment where other people aren't talking about it, that kind of thinking becomes so chronic that it seems to be the only thinking there is about it, when in fact, it's always had other thoughts. And to talk about them and open that door is to offer that opportunity to consider, oh, that isn't true. That can't be. If it's causing a conflict, it can't be true. There is no conflict in truth and reality. And start to notice that this knowing awareness that Santiago referred to and that you're beginning to witness, Anthony, and that Jana talked about when she had her moment of recognizing that responsibility is, she's responsible regardless of what she thinks about taking or giving responsibility. And Matthew described in some of his awarenesses, and Austin and I have talked about, and Doug and I have talked about, Laura Alice and, Gabe and I, everyone has participated in that to some degree. That knowing awareness knows. It doesn't think. It doesn't go off the rails. There are no rails it's on. We're not trying to think out of the box here. We're starting to look at the fact we've never been in a box. There is no box to think in or out of. And see that that's actually our knowing awareness. Now, Santiago might think that's less grounded, but I would say in the spirit where there is no space or time, there is no ground, because it's just an absolute stable conscious existence, awareness. And if that's what it is and it's absolute, we can't be exceptions to it. We cannot be exceptions to it. We can think we are when we think exceptional thoughts that are exaggerated, which means either minimal thoughts or maximized thoughts, thinking we can be bigger or smaller. And bigger is grandiosity and smaller is just self-pity. They're just experiences we create as a result of the size of the thinking we're doing in relation to how things actually are. And it isn't because of the thinking we're doing, it's believing the thinking is true that has the effect appear to be true, seem to be true, seem to be real. That's all that it is. It's just a masquerade ball where we've worn a mask and keep yelling at the mirror to take it off. It isn't on to begin with. It's only thought to be. So for Austin, what's the name of the podcast?
Escaping Death.
And what's interesting about that concept too is there is no escape from death. We talk about it in physical terms because we think about life as being all we are by his bodies and brains. But there is no escape from reality. And since reality isn't founded on something that ever ends, it's founded on something always beginning. There is no death in it. So there is no escape from it. And most of what we suffer from in terms of fear of death have to do with being afraid to let go of the thoughts we have that aren't true about it. That's all. When people go, they die, their bodies die, their body transforms. We tend to want to transform through life and yet miss the fact that dying is one of the greatest transformations we ever go through. Every aspect of our body goes through it. And yet at the same time, it's been going through it the whole time. It's constantly transforming. All the cells are constantly migrating and changing and redoing and affected by how we're thinking. Anxiety, stress, all that stuff affects what our body does. It affects the genes we leave behind for the next generation. Whether we have kids or not, if I'm affecting other people with anxiety, the stress they're creating is maladapting their genes to conditions that they will pass on. I don't have to be creating kids to have that affect them when I'm affecting everyone else, but what I'm doing right now.
It's an interesting conversation I had when starting the podcast, because I asked another friend to be on it, and he also had a stabbing incident, and he said he didn't feel like he qualified because he didn't flatline. And he said, well, your podcast is about near-death experiences. Don't you have to interview people that, technically flatline? And I said, well, no, I don't feel like you have to flatline to have a near-death experience. And we kind of got into this kind of deep conversation about, well, what constitutes a near-death experience?
Mm-hmm.
And it got into a very interesting conversation about that. And everyone I've talked to, had so to speak, a near-death experience to experience, like told me about this sort of interesting, like they connected to this sort of, it's hard to explain, like, and even some of the experiences weren't where their lives were, where they were injured. They were just connected to this. Like, for example, one friend, their story was that they were traveling through Serbia in the 90s during the war, and they were going to get on a train, and if they were to get on a train and on the wrong train, they would have for sure been killed. And so that was going to be the story. And so I would have considered that a near-death experience. So it's kind of like being at the wrong place at the wrong time, or one false move or one sort of misstep. I think there's this theory in quantum physics. It's like I forgot what it's called. It's like you flip a coin and theory or something like that, and the parallel universe theory or some shit like that. But there's just something to that where you don't you get to a sort of crossroads in your life and you're met with this possibility that you could meet your end, but you don't. And it doesn't sometimes it does mean serious bodily injury, like in your case, Jack, but for some people it just means like being close to that, or like coming really close to that, or I hope that makes sense. So
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting. So
you're
it's
also, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, just tapping into this kind of like realm, I want to say, and I think it's kind of an interesting thing that our bodies are capable of recognizing something that is indescribable, and I think that's connected to what you guys talk about here, that there is this like indescribable like territory, if you will. And
you sound calm. I like the topic. I like how you're describing it. You know what's funny is I was texting somebody as we were talking. I was going to say, do you want to do a paid collaboration together? And I wrote, do you want to do a near-death experience by accident?
Well, to some of your points, Austin, which I'd certainly like to address. My sense is we're not afraid of dying because that knowing nature that you say is indescribable is described in everything that's ever lived. And the totality of it it's a narrative that has no story attached to it because the story of it is everything happening right now. So there's no story in the present. And that's why my suspicion is the present is in fact that knowing nature, and existence is the function of that knowing nature. So we act as though we don't understand it and it's indescribable while we are part of the description that it is expressed. Literally. We are a part of that existence in what we're doing today. My greater suspicion is that we are not afraid to die. It's been about 117 billion people who have accomplished it so far. And while we struggle for perfection on earth very often, every one of them has done that perfectly. And so that would be a crowning achievement of us being here. We come born as bodies, which is the beginning of the story. And everything in between that and the death of that body is the story of our life, seemingly. And yet it's expected, and we make believe that somehow or another we can outthink it by pretending it's not going to happen, rather than concede it and start to see how natural it is that it does happen, and that what we're really afraid of, and this I think really goes to your point, because I did not have a flatlined experience, but there were so many issues that were so close to what would have been catastrophic for my body that were beyond my comprehension, that my experience was to experience a very pure white state that seemed to last for 30 minutes, and it didn't happen for more than a second or two, with a sense of knowing that knew it knew, and it was very clear. And I'd had many experiences leading up to that of thinking I knew that, but then witnessing it was very different. And it took me 10 years to put words to. I used to say I couldn't tell whether the depth of the light was 1,000,000 miles deep or an inch off of my face, because it was so pure. And what I realized 10 years later, it took me to really come to terms with this, is that there were no shadows in that light. It's the first time I'd ever witnessed no shadows. There's no variation. There were no blocks. And that was the thing I was struggling to define when I said it was so pure, etc. And I was trying to put words to it, as you're saying. It's indescribable. And it's simply indescribable because we think of it as something that happens only when we die, rather than seeing that every thought we have that is untrue, we think has a life And we're afraid to let it die because the life we think we've been leading is based on those thoughts. And the fear isn't real fear. It's imagined fear based on thoughts that have no basis other than what we think about them. And that anxiety becomes what we think life is about, and that it's natural, and it is not. It's a byproduct. It's a possibility. It isn't the natural, healthy direction or the normal direction. It's an abnormal direction, just like an allergy is an abnormal response to something. And so to the point when you came on, ironically, I was just talking about denial. If pain is the touchstone of spiritual growth, it concedes that we are only willing to deny until the pain the denial has created is so great we can't go on any longer before we begin to concede something, which shows how desperation has us make believe all we are is what we think. And all we can do is to continue on that basis when in fact who we are is who we are, and there is no death in that being nature at all, ever. If it's always beginning, we even have a metaphor for the fact that something's always starting, it isn't ending. And if it ends for me as a body, it starts up for somebody else. And if it ends for all the bodies we have and we go extinct, which we're pretty capable of doing and doing a good job of proving that capacity, there will be other life forms as they have developed that will continue and develop and develop and develop. And if the whole universe shrinks at some point and contracts, it will re-explode into the same way that it originally started and just continue doing what it's doing. And we call it forever, but I would say there is no forever in the ever-present, because forever never comes when the ever-present is always here. And I think that's a mistaken form of denial, trying to make believe it's in the future somewhere, when in fact, if it's ever-present, it's absolutely where we always are. And even the ever-present, even forever, is a torture test, because we never seem to get there, no matter how far or how long we go. That's exactly what addiction tries to do. More is going to make it. More is going to get me there. More is going to be the answer. More is going to be the solution, rather than everything that's possible is happening right now. There is no more in totality. There is no more in enough. If enough is not enough, language is completely turned into a completely useless vehicle for ideas and thoughts.
Do you remember the first time that you ever thought about who you were, Jack? How old were you? Like when you had a consciousness of who you wanted to be and what you wanted to become?
Yeah, I ran away. I ran away that day. I was probably 3. No, I don't remember. I didn't really ever want to be anything, which was kind of odd, because my dad would say, don't you want to grow up to be something or somebody? And I said, how could I be if I weren't?
Yeah.
So that would keep him quiet for a month or so. But, drugs gave me a perfect excuse once I started using them to be thoughtless. And drinking. I just basically didn't prepare as my friends and everyone else got ready for college and doing all those things. And I just did what I wanted to do the way I wanted to do it. And it wasn't very fruitful for a long time. But the failure of it was the guidance system of it. And I'm not suggesting college is the answer, but certainly being here and exploring the capacity we have as beings on a planet might turn more fruitful if how we're thinking about things is how they're actually happening, rather than how we're making believe they're happening, and then fight for what we believe in rather than what actually is, and start to see there is no fight in how things actually are. And I think, Anthony, you're witnessing that. Yeah. You're witnessing the peace. It kind of all the armor, the spears, the swords, everything gets put on that. It's like you don't need them anymore because there isn't any fight. And all of a sudden it feels useless for a minute, but that's good. If what you've been doing has been useless and you stop doing it, it isn't useless to stop. It's the beginning of actually realizing that where addiction starts is in the starting of it. It's not in the ending of it.
Wow.
We constantly seem to be focused at trying to stop something rather than say, what is it we're doing that keeps starting it?
Yeah.
And that's the essence of starting to look at things honestly and starting
30 years sober. That's the shit you learn.
Well, we all did it. We were told
early
been
sober 30 years on this podcast. Nobody's been 30 years sober.
They said 35 years ago, it starts with the first drink. And yet when it comes to thinking, we think we have to fix the thinking from the backside, how we feel, rather than see that the cause of our thoughts is what's having us feel what we feel. So if I feel bad and I'm trying to feel better, I'm treating the symptom again, just like I did with the drinking, thinking that feeling better because I drank was creating a better situation when in fact it was allowing the problem to fester and grow. Just like if I said to somebody, I've got a huge or had a huge tumor and just thought not telling anybody would work.
What was your moment of clarity, Jack? I forgot what it was, where you got sober.
It's kind of what we talk about here. What I thought finally that clarified things from me, and it's exactly what I use now to talk about consideration. Consideration is not agreeing with something or believing in something or trusting in something or hoping in something or having faith in something. It's simply in thinking, maybe it's possible. That's it. Consideration is living with it in the most peaceful way, because when I start thinking maybe it's possible, that allows for a lot of opportunity to be considered. Rather than
what was the craziest thing you ever did while you were drunk?
Well, getting back to your previous point, when I realized that maybe what I was hearing in meetings was true, I'd gone to meetings for 6 years to deny I had a problem and tell everybody why I didn't belong there. When I simply had that thought one morning at 8:00 in the morning on August 7th, 1987, and I already had a joint in my mouth, and I thought, what the fuck am I doing? After having sworn it off again, and I thought, maybe what they're saying is correct. And maybe what I'm hearing about this being a disease is accurate. And maybe the sooner I talk about that or think that, the better off I'll be. And I immediately, without almost thinking, picked up the phone, called a guy. I can tell you his number right now. And he answered the phone and never said anything. I said, I got a problem. I need help. He said, what are you doing for lunch? Didn't even miss a beat. He didn't say, what's your problem? He knew exactly what it was. I'd been avoiding him for years. He turned out to be my first sponsor. But that clarity, Anthony, that day, I knew that day stoned that I would get a year sober, and I'd never gotten that in 6 years of debating.
That's awesome.
I knew it because the obsession, now that I was aligned with things accurately in my thinking, I was no longer fighting them inaccurately, trying to fight a fight I couldn't win, and wondering why I constantly needed to repair the thinking I was doing by feeling better for the misery I was creating. So within 90 days, I was standing in my apartment. And the next thought was, you've got a serious fucking problem. And it was not drinking, and it was not marijuana, and it was not coke. It's your thinking, young man. And I had a flash of my father, my mother. My mother used to look at me and she says, I know you're up to something. She wouldn't even say, I know. She'd just say, you're up to something. Her own confidence. And she knew it. She could see behind my face, on my face. And I had that same experience. And I saw all those times that she was there witnessing it and doing her best to communicate.
What made you want to get sober, though? Why wasn't it working? What happened?
Just never worked. I always felt sick about it. I knew I had a problem within, the first time I ever drank. I drank an 8-ounce glass of scotch and an 8-ounce glass of warm bourbon to figure out which it was going to be, because that was the beginning of a revolution as far as I was concerned. I was going to fight the world. And I was 14. I didn't need the first drink to have an obsession. I had the obsession before I drank. I knew that I was using it for an excuse to do what I saw other people do. I used to hear my father in the basements in Michigan with other friends laughing and enjoying, while when he came upstairs, he only yelled at us for running around too loud or making a mess or whatever we were doing. And I thought, well, that's a direction. That seems the one thing they don't want us to be a part of is the only thing I wanted to be a part of. But it was subtler than that, Anthony. It's just, I didn't know what to do. So I was afraid. I was insecure. I didn't know how to tell anybody that. So I thought the job was to look like I wasn't doing that. So that's how I began to develop in my own experience. And I looked at the world as sad and fraught with problems. And I don't think I was wrong, but I didn't get that it was the problems I was having that I was seeing either. And that became clear that day and in sobriety. Probably not very different than what we all go through. It's written about in the big book, One Way for Everyone.
That would be great if you started your shares in a meeting when you're the speaker like that, to tell how you got there. It makes it relatable.
He doesn't have any problem starting his shares, Anthony.
Well, I always find it's a really odd thing. I always find I go knowing exactly what I'm going to say, and I always leave wondering why I didn't. So my thinking is generally a little ahead of me. And the things I think I could say or should say, I seem to never say. And the things that I don't expect to say, I seem to say. And then I wonder why, so that, as I said earlier, is I up the ante of my commitment in any regard, the failure and fractured nature of my thinking starts to become a little more obvious. When I do nothing at all, there's no expectations. There's no potential risk. There's no fraught. There's none of that, except that I begin realizing if I'm doing nothing within a very short period of time, I'm not going to have a place to do nothing in. I'm not going to have a car to drive. I'm not going to have food to eat. I'm not. So that sort of accordion of awareness starts to it starts to become recognizable that I can take time out. But ultimately, my goal, our goal, what we're here to do, as far as I'm concerned, is function usefully and wholly for others, exactly as the book says. Why? What would that mean? It means that I'm doing more than I need for myself, so I have more to give, both in the freedom of my own thinking and in the capacity of my own giving. And what would that be like? Love. And what has love given us all? Absolute freedom to completely self-destruct without reservation. That's a loving parent who says, look, you want to ride the bike without the training wheels? Go ahead. You may fall, you may scrape your knee, but you're going to learn faster than thinking the training wheels are saving you.
Well, at least that parent was there.
The interesting thing too, Matthew, about the training wheel thing is when a bike is ridden and it's more like life and sailing, you're always going back and forth. And what are the training wheels doing? They're trying to create stability for the bike. So you end up thinking that it needs to be straight all the time. So when you actually have the wheels off, you might get quickly, that adjustment happens very naturally.
Yes.
When we're thinking
down a mountain in Hofgarten, especially going down a mountain in Hofgarten in Austria.
Woohoo! Fast. Yeah. Well, the faster you go, interesting, the less weaving tends to go on, because it tends to like a what do they call them? The gyroscopes. You tend to create, you can feel the resistance when you move it from the spin that is going on. The spin tends to have its own centrifugal force. But
what common characteristic, all the people that stay sober a long time like you, Jack, what common characteristic do they have? Going to meetings, or what is it that they all have in common?
They don't drink.
Yeah, that's. I like your new hairdo too, Janet, by the way, real quick.
The book says it, Anthony. Our program is contingent on the basis of the maintenance of our spiritual condition. And I don't think we maintain our spiritual condition. I think we maintain the impression we create in our thinking by doing things that are principled and acting principally, and starting to notice that principles aren't an option. They're absolutely our nature. When we think they're optional, we start doing unprincipled things, trying to prove that we're principled, and then wonder why we have to constantly fix it. Bingo, by the way, Anthony.
Yeah.
Right? The thinking we're doing about it is the thinking we're creating to give us the impression.
Yeah.
And we think it's life. We think life is hard, life is complicated. It is not life. The world is not hard. The world is not sick. We are the reflection of those thoughts. Sick
Did
thoughts.
you have a problem with the God concept when you first went to AA?
Well, being God when I got there, no.
Oh my God, you're so fucking funny. I was like, nobody's ever asked that question, and then your answer was great.
You know what? The first time I heard, what was interesting in going to meetings, a couple of things struck me. They said there is a solution. So I kept saying to people, what is the solution? They'd say, did you get a book? I'd say, no. What is the solution? They'd say, do you have a sponsor? I'd say, no. What is the solution? Do you talk to anybody about the no? Have you worked the steps? No. What's the solution? Right? So that was my mode of operating.
There's a page that they would say, turn to page 69.
But I wouldn't read. I was looking for the solution.
Right,
I wouldn't do anything. I wasn't interested in doing anything. I was interested in getting the solution so I could get back to I thought I was there to figure out how to drink and use manageably.
Yeah, I had
really
the same
did.
question, but my guy would just tell me, read this. There is a solution. I'm like, fuck.
The other thing that struck me very quickly was when they said a God of your own understanding, it was the first time I thought to myself that I'd always known that thing and always thought I had to conform to the ideas I had about it. And that was a huge sort of stop me in my track, put me in my seat, put me in my feet. And I thought, oh, If that's all it is, I've always known that. I've always had that sense
of conforming. Is
What's
that
that?
what you're talking about, conforming?
Well, I grew up in the Christian Science Church. My mother died when I was 15 from cancer because she had a tumor and thought she'd pray it away and didn't do anything about it until it got so big that, she lost her breast and then had brain cancer. So I got to witness this woman who had introduced me.
Who just wanted to come in right now? God?
Well, she'd introduced me to omnipotence and omniscience and all of these concepts within the religion that was struggling to do what it could in its way to begin to remind humans that this is actually the basis of existence. And I basically did as much as I could to make her life difficult because I couldn't accept it so freely. I couldn't seem to come to terms with it. I was having my own struggles because I was young and thought I needed to do the right thing. And I only saw that behavior seemed to be critical to adults, not actually what was happening. I didn't know that. I just didn't know better. And so even now, thinking about it in that way is to witness the lack of real understanding I have in relation to those things, is to think of her as gone rather than actually having given me exactly what she was talking about.
Yeah.
And now being realized in this conversation. So I would say the iceberg that I've been living on still has some melting to do. And when I do, I feel a little less cool and distant and numb because ice is a great numbing agent. And my sense is, when I started crying, I was 26 when I admitted that I missed my mother. And the tension that I'd caused in my body was so great that the next day I had 8 full-on bowel movements. 8. And I realized what being full of shit was. In real terms, I thought, wow, they're actually using the term accurately. That tension on my body for years had prevented my body from functioning out of one single thought that I maintained, thinking she was better off, she was no longer in pain, all the stuff I did to rationalize it, but simply couldn't admit that I missed my mother. And in some way, in all those human ways, I clearly still do.
Oh.
I miss her being able to talk about these things in the way she tried, in the way she did, and the fact that she got through. Because if she was talking about things that were omnipotent and omniscient and omnipresent, she was talking about things that I always knew and simply couldn't concede in my own experience and thinking, even then. And so when I drank, I knew I was 14 and knew I needed a drink. That's pretty good. So, the freedom here is looking out, and I don't have a lack of compassion for people because I'm not living at the state they're in. I have a greater sense of compassion for them, recognizing they are a part of what I'm doing and what I'm not doing. And to any degree I'm doing it poorly or wrong, I am not doing all that I can. And I would say that's our discussion, is looking at the breadth of possibility. It's the beauty of it. None of it's necessary. None of it's demanding. It will all work out as it will work out. The question is, are we interested in watching people suffer at a greater or lesser degree? And it starts with how willing we are to acknowledge the limits we have in our own biology and our own thinking about what we're doing, and how that has impaired our ability to function in ways that are universal and are inclusive. Stephen Hawking said, self-centeredness being one of the major roots of the idea that I think of myself creates a self-centered in thought, and then who I think I am is centered in thought. So the edges of that thought become the doom I face and the fear I have about living in life. Stephen Hawking said, in an infinite universe, everything's at the center, which is what Bill did with the traditions, talked about unity, talked
No,
about.
Jack, you don't have to make us laugh right now. Let's get back into why you were crying.
Is there something I should be doing that I'm not?
You're right. You notice how you first, or you went
Anthony.
right into like making everybody feel okay. It's okay not to have that.
Anthony, are you trying to make Jack cry?
Right? I mean, it's okay. He took off the, I'm like, holy shit. He just took off his glasses. And so I registered right now, takingoffthemask.com. It's fucking huge. That's what this is about.
Well, yes. And between all of us, the fact is that those pains, trauma is largely unrealized pain, and it isn't healthy.
Well, we wasted a lot of money on that survey, right? Trauma is, that was a waste of a lot. I could have saved you a lot of money there.
Well, the capacity we have is enormous. The functional capacity we have is enormous as humans. If we're already in an infinite being state as beings, there is no lack there. There is no tears there. There is no grief there. There is no mourning. It's all a function of what we're doing on a human level. And I have been through these cycles enough to recognize it. And I'm always impressed by the simple bit of willingness to begin to re-experience it and notice that it isn't that it's there waiting for me. It's that I'm simply conscious of something that's always available and always to be, porpoises tend not to find new mates when their mates die. Porpoises, pretty incredible beings. Porpoises are like the shark's greatest threat, and they're passive creatures.
Right. I like the way Jack.
They don't replace their spouses. They respect them. They honor them. And my sense is that the crying and the sadness I had was a tribute to my mother and a tribute to my regard for her. It wasn't something to be ashamed of. Bingo. But yet I don't tend to, being a male, being a man, being, somebody with still two balls. I don't claim that I have to have more. But there is great relief in the conversation to know that this isn't something I do alone. It isn't something either or any of us share alone. This is something we all share in totality all the time. This is part of what we are here to do, and we are designed to have the expressions we have. And to think we're not is to act shameful and guilty for what we're ashamed for doing and guilty for what we're doing, period.
Right. And you know what's nice to see you crying? Why it's kind of nice, Jack?
Does it relieve you from having to do it, Anthony?
No, because I know you're not a psychopath, right? Psychopaths don't cry over stuff like that.
Well, I could be crying over not killing you. That might count.
Somebody said when they're feeling terrible about something, go, well, the good news is, you're not a psychopath, right? Psychopaths don't cry over this stuff.
You guys have helped me thaw out.
You've been close to that recently. Have you had shed good tears over that?
No, you know what? I didn't even cry over my mom, to tell you the truth. It's kind of scaring me a little. Like it's not even affected me. It affected me, but I just haven't cried.
Once you get the right girlfriend, you can bawl your eyes out to her.
That's what I'm thinking. That's exactly
I know you only too well.
Hey, Jana texted me while we were talking unmasked. I love that.
It must be cathartic then to see Jack, after all these years, shed tears over his loss. Is that something then that just feels like, oh, you can live that through him?
I wish, as
opposed to having it yourself.
How I should be thinking versus how I'm actually thinking. I'm like, this just got real.
How you're thinking is how you're thinking.
Here's the other side of this, though, to consider, because this will take it to a more absolute sense. The thing I've realized is that I'm still hanging on to thoughts about death as though they're true. Mm. And what I miss is in that whenever this happens, I think crying comes from two directions. It's either self-pity because of things I don't think I've gotten or I'm losing or don't have anymore, or awe. And it's another form of laughing. It's
or you don't have to even analyze.
Inspired state of being aware. Think of awe. It starts aware, right? We are aware. We are awed by the capacity. And what I'm realizing is that what I really regret in those things isn't what I did and didn't do, since those things are done. It's what I'm not doing now with that full capacity that is inclusive of my mother and my father and your mom and dad.
Yes.
We all got a chance, Anthony, to witness your dad at 93 become one of our greatest players in this conversation.
Love you. Did that really happen.com?
Yeah.
Was that the dream.com? Fuck.
Last word.
So
That's words.com.
The witness of the present is somewhat an awareness of the discount I have allowed myself to participate in the depravity, in the degradation, in the degeneration, in all of the things going on that are wrong in the world today, because I haven't bothered to allow the great capacity I have to be expressed in an infinite way, while I've been nursing wounds about things that are no longer happening. And what I'm really hurting over is the present nature of my own incapacity that I've been unwilling to recognize isn't limited by anything other than my thinking.
And what was your mom's name, so we don't just refer to her as my mom?
Janet.
Right? Janet. Thank you, Janet, for having a great son. He was always up to something.
We had Katie and I had lunch with my second wife, who I was married to for about 2 months.
A month and a half too long. Also,
I loved her, but we were crazy together, and I still love her. She's an incredible woman. It wasn't 2 months, but it was very short-lived. But we had lunch with her and her husband that she remarried, her first and now second husband, recently, and she said that Katie came to do for you what your mother stopped being able to do for you.
What did you say?
That's not sexy.
As an ex-wife, to have the sort of generosity just reminded me that I still love her and she still loves me. And she's able to see things clearly enough to give herself away in ways that she wasn't always able and I wasn't always able to do when we were together. And yet that present nature still exists and won't end, because it's always there.
Bingo.
And to me, that is a pretty profound, awesome exploration of our capacity as humans to begin to participate at levels that are so well beyond the limited thoughts we have, that the expression begins to be normal because it is, and healthy because it is, rather than abnormal because it isn't, and unhealthy because it isn't. We are not far from it, because we are still a product of it all the time. And talking about it is a chance to really allow that to begin to unravel. And the knowing nature of that unraveling will have you, as I said earlier, say things, which means you're thinking them, not from a thinking point, but a knowing point. And they're expressing through your thoughts and words before you even notice they're happening. And you'll say it and say, where did that come from? Because you'll be saying things and doing things you would never do on the basis of the limited conflict and the limited ideas and the thoughts. It's natural. It's just natural. That's our nature. So my sense is that greater like when I go through these bouts about my mother, about my father, about the people that were closest to me, and I'm using them as my excuse to diminish my own sadness, to diminish or enhance my own sadness about what I'm doing right now.
Yes.
Is to not give you them the tribute of having given me everything to have this possibility, because I'm wearing right now their body.
Yes. It's 11:11 right now.
I am wearing their body right now.
They gave you that. That's one thing they gave you.
Who I think I'm missing, I'm actually witnessing and pretending I'm not, and all those things. And that's still a fractured state of conversation.
And even if you're mad at yourself, Jack, it's not even the real you that you're mad at. It's like who you think you are.
Well, when I'm mad at you, Anthony, it's really you.
The exception to the rule. Fuck.
No, of course. It's the thoughts.
Hey, don't say of course. People don't realize that, because I was so mad at myself the other day for all the time. I go, wait a second. It's not even me. It's the guy I think that I'm mad at I go, that's so free.
Well, and what's freeing about it is that we're free to do it.
Right. And then I found out, but whenever you're mad at me, it's actually true.
No, I'm
That's
just
really not. Is that
You're
really
only
fair?
helping, Anthony, you're helping me see the limits of my own expectations, which means they're based on the limits of my own thoughts. And they're basically a consequence of that limited thinking. That's all. And I'm thinking it's right and it's real. And as a result, anything that I'm frustrated with is just coming from the frustration I have for what I'm doing rather than what I see in you. If I need to use you as an excuse, thank you for allowing me.
Yes. And if we're even
Because it gives
talking
me a
about this,
perspective.
obviously it's a possibility. And not only do you do that to other people, Jack, you do that worse to yourself.
Well, imagine thinking there's a self to do it worse to is as worse as it can get.
There you go. That's the next.
That's
Hello. Drop the
that's
mic.
ultimately, talk about frustration.
Drop the mic.
Wow. It's like I'm on myself, thinking of myself and wondering why I think there's no room to think of myself any further, and all I could do. It's insanity masquerading as a life.
And then you throw in not sleeping all night and it's done.
Okay. So we had a window open, maybe. I don't know.
Oh, that's why our electric bill is so high around here.
I would say the window's always open. We're never in the box. There's no box to be in or out of. So with that, what do we do as people, as humans, as interested people in obviously our own condition sufficiently to consider others? What do we end up doing? What are we capable of doing?
What does the word capable mean?
We're capable of using acceptance and love in every circumstance, and it pays off.
Teacher's pet. Hello. Okay, teacher's pet.
I have an interesting experience to share. So the day before yesterday, I sold this gal a wedding dress. She was from Illinois, 28 years old, the most darling, corn-fed, loving, accepting human being. And she really raised the level. Her acceptance of herself was so lovely. And she was kind of big, and I only had one dress out of 57 dresses in my inventory that would fit her, and we popped it on her, and she looked beautiful. We really bonded, and then I took a bunch of pictures of her all over my property and her intended. And then she texted me yesterday morning and goes, "Could you come and give me away?" I'm like, oh, fuck, it's like an hour and 20 minutes from my house. I have to leave my, double gated 3.5 acres on the ocean to drive into the city. But, at the very last minute, I whacked bamboo all day yesterday and I was exhausted and I could have just gone and laid down, but I did it. And I literally ended up just being there to kind of video the thing. I was there for literally maybe 40 minutes. And then I had that long drive home. And I never once felt resentful or that it was the wrong choice, because she was so filled with love and innocence. And they didn't even I was thinking, oh no, they're going to offer me champagne. It's going to be awkward. I got to get out of there. None of that. There was no hors d'oeuvres, no champagne, no nothing. She just had this cute little ceremony and wanted company. And my friend of 45 years that used to be my paddling coach, Pia Aluli, who's got a 6-month wait, did it on the spur as a favor to me. And he was there. So it was just the four of us. And I thought, this is probably the first time that I can remember ever feeling so good about something that was I could have conjured in my head an irritation or a resentment, or that I didn't benefit enough. I benefited 1,000 times more than had they offered. If they had offered me a couple $100 to come and do it or whatever, it would have dirtied the whole thing, because it was so innocent and so lovely. And she was literally almost crying when I got there. She was so excited about it. And actually it was being of service, and it was a way of being that felt really good, but it wasn't a parade. It was subtle. And it was just do the next right thing for somebody else. And the rewards are endless. I mean, I give myself permission now to not go to the dark side, or not to resent, or not to put that extra layer of my experiences in what is this going to do for me? How am I going to benefit?
You had me at whacking the bamboo all day.
My suspicion too, Jana, in terms of the growth that you're talking about, is that I realized one day that my brain, as I used it, tended to react in ways that directed me not to do the thing that would have disbanded the thinking I was doing. If you follow me.
Yes, yes.
And so now the reaction's a guidance system to do the thing, because I know that I'm going to begin facing something rather than running from it. And that's the undoing very often of the sick thinking, because I can begin to experience. What I've learned is that there's always so much more, as you just described so beautifully. When I do that thing I'm sure I shouldn't be doing and I'm reluctant to do and I don't want to do, and it's going to this, that, and the other thing, and I go and do it, my baseline for expectation is already on the ground. So everything that happens becomes clearly beneficial, rather than setting the bar so high that I only look for the few things that exceed it to be satisfied with, because I've really ground things down to how they really are, which is that nothing's happening that I'm not thinking about in terms of how it's happening. All the value judgments comes from my brain. It doesn't come, the earth doesn't say, I'm having a great day. Look at this day I've created for myself. The earth just does what it does. Things do what they do. They're not sitting around with their hands on their hips wondering why people aren't doing what they're doing the way they thought they should be. They're not thinking about it. They know. And that knowing nature begins to help me see that my reactiveness is being shown to me in things I think I shouldn't be doing. And it doesn't mean I have to act on them all. But if I begin to disband the thinking and say, wow, that's really interesting. That happens a lot during the day. All of a sudden, I have a peaceful relationship to it because I'm not thinking it's something to get away from or fight. And the basis of that peace allows me peaceful thinking, which is an intuitive sense rather than a thinking sense. The thinking sense is almost always on some sort of collaborative, reactive tear. If I'm making believe, the use of it is to conclude truth and reality is going to become possible as a result of doing more of it.
Well, it's super subtle. It's like
Yes.
when I first had my realization that I was responsible, it was like a big parade. I was super stoked, and then I cried for like a week, and then there was just a lot attached to it, and I would conjure up chaos of some sort because I wasn't used to the calmness, and it was so subtle. It was uncomfortable because it wasn't a parade, and it wasn't that thing. Now it seems like this subtle sense of being, when anything ugly, mean, or bad happens, it's very apparent. Like I had 3 nights ago, a neighbor was buzzed and kind of said a couple, I don't know, just rude things or whatever. And I felt my body like so much more than it normally would have reacted. I felt like I was almost going to throw up. It was like a punch in the face, even though I knew, I was okay. My side of the street was clean. I was sober and she was buzzed. And then like it was still bugging. And then I saw her like, a day and a half later, which was yesterday. And I just automatically waved and said, hey, how are you doing? And it all dissolved. Like I didn't have to hold on to any of it anymore. And I don't have to hold on to any of it anymore. I don't have to have a parade anymore. The next right thing just happens, and I don't conjure up the ugly, mean, or bad anymore. Instead, the ugly, mean, or bad, it's sort of like it flipped. Before it was like little glimpses of the calm and the acceptance, stop it, and the love. And then it was just, I would conjure up the chaos. And now that I'm not conjuring up the chaos, my state of being, like 90% of the time, is that calm state of being. And I'm not conjuring up the chaos. And if the chaos happens, it's very apparent immediately. And I can make that choice usually within a short amount of time, but my body still reacts. But I can make it through, and it's okay. But that consistent calmness or whatever it is so subtle, but it's so beautiful. I was walking by my caretaker yesterday and I said, oh my God, I'm just so overwhelmed with gratitude. Everything is just perfect. And he goes, anything in particular? And I said, no, not really. It just seems like everything just seems to be okay. And that was okay to have it be okay. It wasn't necessarily a parade, but it wasn't ugly, mean, or bad ever. And I wasn't trying to sabotage it for once in my life.
So that's really a witness to exactly what we've been talking about. And I know that you've made great progress, and it's not just your location, Jenna.
No,
right?
It's because of you, because you always talk me through it every time when I'm freaking out. You cry with me, you laugh with me, but you're steady. You never give me permission to go into the dark. You're like, hey, and you just steer me back a little bit. And the consistency of what we talk about has, become a part of my way of being. And it's such an incredible gift. I can't even tell you.
Well, let me assure you that you've known it all along and just thought you didn't. And the idea, when we talk about letting go, the real freedom of this is beginning to realize we've never hung on to anything that narratives we attached images to that we thought were real, because they were byproducts of that same thinking we thought was true. So when you think of it as a parade and a mask, those are images we create to make believe we actually wore that mask and were in that parade. And the fact was, it was just another succession of thoughts trying to conspire in the same way that we set them in the direction of, to create an image and a story to justify the insanity that we were thinking. So then we think it's real.
I hardly ever say to myself, what are you up to now? First of all, it took me forever to figure out what you meant by that. And finally it eased in, and then I could totally recognize it, and it was familiar, and I got it, but it was like 5,000 times a day. What the fuck? What are you up to? What are you up to? Now, just very rarely, once in a while, I get a little thing, and then it just dissipates immediately, because as soon as my body feels it, and the rest of me goes, nah. I could have gone through so many Alice in Wonderland loopholes with my insanity. I used to be jealous. I used to be all kinds of things. And now all I want is to be compassionate, to be of service, and to get back. You get what you give. And if I reflect love, I get nothing but love. I set up 4 days ago on Hana Highway, and 7 women, I have pictures of me and them with them, and we exchanged each other's phone numbers, and I sold them canthus, but all day it was like this huge love fest, and it had zero to do with money and all to do with connection. And it was just beautiful.
Well, what I'm hearing is you're starting to see that you have choice in the matter.
Very much.
And that means that you have a second to think about what you're doing rather than act on it without thinking. Because that's basically what thoughtlessness is it's not less thought. Like powerlessness isn't less power, it's no power. Thoughtless means no thought. And the irony is, in ego terms, not thinking and doing the wrong thing is exactly what we're capable of doing when we don't think about doing the right thing. Because intuition is knowledge beyond reason. It gives us direction. And whether we take it or not doesn't require thinking, but our thinking will all of a sudden, when we're relying on it, align in ways that we will do things and think things and cause things in ways that we can't predict, that'll be better than we could have predicted if we thought, we were going to get as what we expected constantly. And that's pretty soon you begin expecting, I'm going to get more than I even think, because I'm going in the right direction here. I can feel it because I'm not fighting it. I'm not arguing with it. And I'm just stepping in that direction or sitting still, Anthony, which is what I think you're starting to do. So a couple of things. Gabe and I had talked about this at length on some walks we take in the morning. As you begin seeing this, it makes clearer the smaller things, the little specks of dust on the telescope or microscope that screw up the image.
Mm-hmm.
And you start seeing it, and you'll have episodes where you think you're backsliding, but you're actually getting more clear by noticing things that are a little overwhelming at first, because they're things you've never bothered to face and never bothered to experience. And they're those things built into the body. My sense is that Elon Musk just basically developed a car to reflect the way we've treated our bodies, which is to constantly charge it with energy that it doesn't need by creating tension that is stored in areas that we can't wait to relieve, and we pay good money. I mean, why is it the masseuses get as much as people who spend 7 years in medical school per hour? Because they're giving us some good feeling about the tension we're doing.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, they're actually treating some. So if we are capable of creating the tension, we are capable of relieving the tension, and that tension comes out in the fear and in the anxiety and in the grief and in the shame and in all the things that we've stored in those words that we use to define the lack of capacity that we have to maintain those things any longer. When we start looking at them clearly, they will dissipate exactly as you just described, and exactly as Anthony described to me earlier this week, where there just wasn't anything there. And it felt really odd for him, because he's always able to come up with something, and he thought, there's nothing here to even come up with. And that's a decision made in clarity rather than in desperation and fear. The self-imposed fear will always have us choose self-imposed fear.
Yeah, I think that thing, that the subtleness of something not happening used to create fear. And that's when I wanted to create chaos or static or, some kind of friction, I guess, just to know I'm still alive. That now, to me, I don't want to sound like the Dalai fucking Lama or something, but I am so filled.
How about Dolly Parton?
there you go. I'm so filled, really truthfully filled with so much love and gratitude, most consistently all day, that it's unbelievable. I just want to share it with everybody.
You know why it's unbelievable?
Because it's not what I'm used to. It's not familiar yet, but it's getting more familiar.
Because it's not reliant on belief. It's your natural state of being you're witnessing. And belief doesn't change it.
Then no one would ever kill themselves or think ugly, mean, or bad thoughts if they could get to the state of being. And I think that that's what God wanted for us.
Well, it's what we have. So I would say that's pretty much in line. I don't think God said, well, I'm going to make a choice either to send him to hell or give him heaven. My sense is that an ever-loving spirit just knows to love, that's what that consciousness is. And listen, we're so bound by the ideas of time and space and limits and all that kind of stuff that we really think that's our primary experience and thinks that it's absurd to imagine anything else could exist that didn't start and doesn't end. When in fact, in the realm of that thing that doesn't start and doesn't end, it's absurd to think we can imagine the limits we express are truth and reality. But it doesn't think that way because it doesn't see what we're doing is wrong. All we do is experience the wrong we're doing immediately in the physicality that we share. And as a result, the social conditions are all extensions of that thinking. So what we're seeing socially that seems so difficult to deal with is a byproduct of the same thinking we're individually doing in any weak way we're doing it, in any sick way we're doing it. It's just a manifestation of that stuff. It's not curious, but people are starting to say, I don't know what to make of it. And I said, that's good. At least if you don't know what to make of it, you may be able to begin to admit it is what it is as a result of what we've made of it when it comes to the problems. That's a good starting point. It might be worth noticing that we've had some culpability in all this stuff, and to any degree that we've affected it and it's now affecting us, it might be a good time to say, wow, we haven't done very well at admitting what we've simply been doing. And I would say that stems from each of us doing that in our own seeming lives, rather than notice that when I'm doing it for everyone and everything, everywhere, because I'm not exclusive from that. I am a part of it all. And to your point, Jana, thanking me, it isn't the thanks I deserve. It's the generosity of thanks we all have and are grateful for the fullness of greatness that we're beginning to realize and express in the conversation we're having, which this conversation now has taken almost 2 years to get to, by the way. We've been meeting for an hour and a half and going 3 and 4 hours a week simply because we've been waiting for this point, I would say, to be made. While we've been making it in spits and spurts and here and there, it's starting to be made in the totality of the silence we're witnessing and the generosity that we're hearing.
Well, I think I finally, for me, in my experience, forgave myself, because I don't think that we feel inherently that we're worthy of that peace. And for me as an addict, I wouldn't know what peace was. It was either a parade or fucking hell, one or the other. There was no subtle in between, like normal people, I guess, experience or whatever.
Keep in mind, though, those experiences seem so real and true that we think we don't need peace. But if we didn't know peace, we would not be disturbed by disturbances.
Well, we weren't as much as, like, if a normie was inside my head for like a day when I'm psycho, they would probably totally stick a chopstick in their eye and be done with it. I mean, our state of chaos is so elevated compared to the norm, I would think.
I wouldn't speak for everybody, because I would say a lot of the people who look normal, their denial is forcing that on is an appearance. And I only say that not to undermine people, but if it's true, if it's accurate, if it's an assessment that could be made, then making it would be a good way of beginning to talk about it in ways that we stop having confidence in how people look and start realizing that they may well be having a much different experience in the self they call theirs than we're witnessing. And all the things they've done to manicure their appearance are things we wish we could have done when we knew we didn't look that good. So keep in mind too, Jenna, when you felt less than and loathsome, those were accurate assessments of less than all you are and loathsome ideas about who you were. And those things we think of as self-worth, we have no self-worth. Well, there is no self-worth in a self made up in thought that's made to believe to be true. There is no self-worth in it. The real unbelievability is that we believe in the thing we make up as being true and real. That's unbelievable. So if we're believing in the unbelievability of something, we're actually hoping against hope. We have faith in faithless things. And we're actually creating that cycle that goes on and on and on and on. Looks like a parade because we give images to it to make it seem like a parade so that we can justify the thinking we're doing about it that has no basis whatsoever.
I think the key to everything was forgiveness and then permission.
Yes.
And that was it.
Well, and think about forgiveness as letting things be as they are.
Exactly. That's the thing. Not
honesty.
Like if I like, there's things that have to be done in everybody's life. And that's, I think, what Anthony was talking about, chasing that one item or whatever. I used to not be able to sit in my yard and not inventory what needed to be trimmed. This needed to be mowed. That needed to be planted. And I would literally go through lists in my head, and it would make the whole experience uncomfortable. Now I can just go, whatever. I mean, the sky's not falling. Chicken Little's not going to go crazy. It's all good.
The difference between contempt and freedom is the difference between need to and can. The trees can be trimmed.
Mm-hmm.
The sky could fall because apparently it's always there. So maybe it is falling. I don't know. I don't know that I would notice.
Chicken Little could round the corner at any minute. We have thousands of chickens here.
Exactly. So it doesn't need to. But if it can and it happens, then it's not a real shock. But if we need to do it and don't, then what we do, we're probably not going to get done in a way, because everywhere we're going to look, we're going to see need, rather than can. And what is possible all of a sudden becomes impossible, and doing anything becomes impossible, while actually sitting still in the moment of peace, we're wondering, what the hell do I do now? There's nothing to do.
I think it's super.
You get desperate.
I think it's super hard to convey how utterly subtle it is, and like just how things are easier for me to do. Like there were so many things that I would panic about, like, my taxes and all that stuff, that was my natural way of being, and how I handled things year in and year out are not the same anymore. So when I just do them, I sometimes remind myself I get down on my knees and I say, I am so grateful that I just completed that without my body having a near heart attack, or, whatever stress I used to feel. And it was always wrapped around it. And so it's so subtle though, because you just do it. And then I remember this used to be so difficult. Now I show my gratitude all the time, because otherwise you're just rolling along and I'm kind of missing the gratitude part.
You know what the conveyance is though, Jenna?
What?
The doing, the expressing. That's the conveyance. You may not have words for it to describe it, because you've been so used to trying to think your rationalizations about what we weren't doing. We think that we're going to use that old theory rather than say, no. It's just in the doing of it, the action of it. You know what action is the basis of? Facts, actuality, realization, self-realization, self-actualization is doing the things that actually are happening rather than the things that aren't happening. Starting to actually live in a world that is functional rather than dysfunctional.
That's it. It's the functional.
So your doing of it is the conveyance of it. And so this goes to a whole other element, but a couple of things to consider is that what's happening is our intention. People talk about intention being this thing that seems to be. Do you notice the lizard in LA's hand? I thought you were praying there for a minute. Wow, that thing is beautiful.
I thought that was a plant. Oh my God!
Look at the beauty.
He is kind of a plant.
Oh, he's beautiful.
Do you think that thing is worried about how it looks?
It does change its color. It changes its color. It changes its color if it's scared.
It does.
So do I.
That's the best thing about these creatures.
I mean, that's pretty big. That's
I
one
do
of the
the same
biggest
thing.
changers in the world.
Oh, you have some of these in your family, don't you, Jana? You've got a couple of chameleons there.
Yeah, at the boys' house. They're all very
good time.
Yeah.
That looks about 7 years old.
They barely live 7 years.
How old is that one?
Yeah. This
Philip,
guy's
good
2.
morning. It's beautiful.
Yeah, these two.
So
No, he doesn't think about any of this stuff. He just is. And it's the most beautiful thing about them. And they are kind of like plants in that way. They're just there. They grow towards the sun, they go towards the heat, they go where they feel comfortable. That's it. They're not overthinking anything.
Yeah, but
survive
he thinks
and
you're
thrive.
God, though. He thinks you're God, though.
I don't think he thinks about God at all.
He thinks
Well,
you're God. You have
Anthony,
food.
Anthony, in that point, nature knows exactly what to do. And I would say it has some thinking, but the thinking is restricted to the choices it's capable of making. That's all. And the fact that we're capable of thinking of ourselves doesn't condemn us to a self of thought that seems condemned. But to make that choice and think there's no way out is to get stuck in a sick loop by the one thing that gives us the greatest advantage over all other things, which is to consider all things in our thinking. We end up turning it against ourselves by thinking only about who we think we are and wonder why we decay and become depraved and delusional in the actions we take, thinking they're the best thing we can do. It's insanity. Animals don't even do it. I would rather have a smaller mind if the condition of my condition was absolutely the condition of my condition rather than one I was choosing. I'd rather have a pea brain happily than all the capacity I have. Our brains are bigger and better than any computer on the entire planet, and they have been developed in a pretty magnificent way so far.
And let's face it, spending the whole day on LA's arm is not that bad of a day.
Right. So things how they are is our intention. And this goes to the point that, Jana, you originally grokked. If the essence of essence is responsible for existence, then our basis is responsible, period. It isn't a negotiable thing. It's not something we take or leave. It is who we are. So that doesn't mean we're not free not to act irresponsibly because we think irresponsibly. It means we're absolutely free to think irresponsibly and act irresponsibly. But what does it make us? Responsible for the irresponsibility we do.
Yes.
That's a very different approach than thinking we give and take responsibility, because then I have to think of how much I have to give and take everybody else. And pretty soon everybody else becomes the problem, rather than just saying, you know what, I'm going to share the pizza. I'm just going to have it all, and then I'm going to give it away, and whatever everybody eats, they'll eat. And if it's a little bigger, they get a little bigger slice, but it's over. It's done. Right now it's done. So the intention is actually what's happening. Now, that would be pretty sick to look around and say, I actually want this. And I would say, yes, it's pretty sick to pretend we don't and perpetuate the wrong we're seeing that we can't accept now as being what we're doing, because we're unwilling to do what we can about what's wrong now. Now we start having a game that we're all playing on an equal footing, because it isn't something I do for you. It's something we all do together, period. There is no doing for you and there is no doing without you. There is no in you and there is no without you. It's just in and out, period. They're all together. It's all one big, whole, happy family of people sad about how little they've expressed that. And I would say that's my greatest sadness. Now, I witnessed that when I was a kid. I felt it. I didn't know what to do with that feeling, but I knew it was there. I saw it in the world. I saw it in what was going on. Didn't know what to do with it. Didn't know I had a part in it. Didn't know the thinking I was doing about it, that I was trying to cover it up to keep from experiencing, would allow me at 67 to continue to experience it in ways that I'm able to actually express it. So I would say that would be the growth and maturity in our life.
What was the biggest breakthrough you ever had, Jack, where you said, Jesus Christ, I am on the other side of this?
Well, I don't think I used Jesus's name to fault.
You use Buddha Christ.
Anthony, it's been, my sense is, in one sense, I've never learned anything because I've known it all, as we all have. And the other sense is all I've learned to do is think about it in ways that I'm continuing to learn every day. And that awakening doesn't mean I didn't know it. It just simply means I haven't been expressing it very well. That's all. And I would say that's my greatest sadness. Because what I see then all of a sudden becomes all the defectiveness and deficiencies I see in the people closest to me that I've seemingly lost, and not realizing that the loss is happening now around me with people who are still here that I think don't matter or count because I'm not thinking about them. And I would say that's a greater loss, because it would not give tribute to people who have been here and gone, to not have learned sufficiently to recognize the capacity that they have to still be here, because here isn't there. It's just a present state of being that isn't in the present. It isn't in the past or future. It's in the present. So it can't be one or the other or both. It is, in fact, our natural state of being right now is not a time-bound, space-bound thing. It's absolutely present as it is everywhere, everything, only because everything possible is possible within the scope of all possibility, which is what existence allows for. So if what's happening is what we think is the best thing that's happening, and we're struggling with impossibilities, I would say the problems we face are not impossible. We're just thinking about them that way. In every respect. Pollution, contamination, global warming, homelessness, addiction, suicide, all this stuff, mental illness, all of it is nothing except what we make of it and think of it. And if we can do that with ourselves, certainly we're capable of expanding. If I can blame reality and truth for my condition, certainly I can begin to utilize reality and truth for the conditions I can create and start to look at things as already resolved rather than as things I need to do anything about. And if I see that, it's kind of like an X-ray. I get to start seeing through the things I used to think were blocks, because now I'm actually looking at them and realizing it was only elusive, only transparent, and only something that looked like it was there. It was a foggy notion rather than anything at all that I gave credit to for much more because I thought it was what it appeared to be, rather than recognize that appearance are not how things are, how things seem. Appearance is simply what I think.
Beautiful.
So our job is to do that. That's all. And Matthew called me from the train the other day. He had almost no time to talk, but he got me on the phone somehow. I saw his, and he was just having a moment where he just saw it all and was sitting amongst people and just like, he didn't want to hear anything from me because what he was witnessing was greater than anything I could possibly comment, and also anything he could say. But I could tell that he was just saying, wow, wow, wow. And my sense is the great fullness we've been missing is what we've been full of while we were full of shit thinking we weren't. So great fullness isn't, and you probably witnessed this, Matthew and Jana, in what you were talking about, and I suspect we all do. When you begin to realize the greatness of it, you begin to realize that grandiosity is the pitiful thoughts we had about ourselves. That's grandiosity. And pride and arrogance is the pitiful nature of the thinking we've been doing. It isn't proud to think that we are something that is so great as to have no limit. If in fact there's an infinite source, we can't be part of anything less than that. And there is no more or less in it. So it's now beginning to allow our thinking to simply be completely diffused of any sense of individuation or importance, because now we begin to be channels and expressions of that thing rather than attempting to fulfill it by come to a thought about it that's going to make it right when it's always been right. It's always been real. It's always been true. It's always been our nature. Yowza, yowza, yowza. So my sense is the awe comes with tears, just as the relief comes with laughter. And it's seeing that everybody has this right now, and everything too. The chameleon that you have in your hand absolutely knows what to do right now and isn't sitting around with the tendon, doesn't have an attitude, it isn't sulking in the corner. It is so happy to be simply sitting on your fingers. That's our natural state. We can share it and reinforce the thinking by talking about it rather than reinforce the stories that try to dismiss it and excuse why we don't have it. And the difference is, to do something unnatural takes forever and can never be achieved. And to do what's natural takes no time at all and has everything immediately achieved. It isn't even achieved. It's just a recognition. It's that state you were describing, Jana. It's just present, that Anthony was describing this past week, and that Matthew described when he called, and Laura Alice and I talked about at some point during the week. It's just starting to let it be what it is, and rather than hackle it with the shackles we put on it, just start noticing, oh, maybe there's more here than I think.
Well, one thing I really like what you said, Jack, is that it's which I never knew this, understanding it's not what it looks like. I thought, well, if I look at it, I know what it is or it's not, but it's not even what it looks like. That's interesting.
Well, think of substance and understanding. They're all suggesting something beneath our stance and sub to the stance we take. So substance, my sense is substance abuse in a lie is thinking the lie has substance.
Whoa, that's great.
And so in the mental condition, if I start to apply thoughts that have no basis and think I'm going to get somewhere, I should feel imperiled very quickly. And I do. I feel self-centered fear. That fear is telling me I'm doing something wrong in my thinking. It isn't who I am. It's just what I'm making up. And then I begin to believe that who I am is what I think. So I think it is who I am. So I need to stop those thoughts at all costs because my life is at risk.
So
the only thing at risk is the thinking I'm doing that's doomed because it has no basis and no substance other than the constant chronic thinking about it.
So when your mom said you're up to something, little did she know she was not far. You're everything about you is up to something. It's not just one little thing that you're doing that's up to something. Your whole self-image is up to something, up to you to create it.
Well, I wouldn't say it's up to me to create. I would say I'm creating it now by anything I think about it, as though it has basis. The fact is, Anthony, when an illusion is an illusion, it isn't any more than an illusion. It's just an illusion. There's no condemnation in that. When illusion becomes truth and reality, I have created the condemnation I claim truth and reality subjects me to because of my own unwillingness to concede what's actually happening. I'm going to then blame everything else for what is happening rather than...
And the key is to knowing the difference between where the delusion starts and where it ends.
You want me to explain that to you?
Yes, please.
Fear, reactiveness, irritability, restlessness, discontent, anxiety, struggle, disturbance, discomfort. All of those things are indicating that something's wrong.
I didn't know that.
Every one of, well, that's your GPS system saying, proceed to the route. Proceed to the route when you miss the turn. Proceed to the route. It's telling you.
I'm going to use that.
But you know what it's doing? It's adjusting to the mistakes. And what do? Keep fighting for the mistake to be true and real and going in the wrong direction.
This thing must be wrong. Something is wrong with this GPS. It's not working.
Yes. So we refuse to even admit what we're doing by thinking getting away from disturbance and things that don't feel good is the job, rather than saying this is good information about what I'm thinking. And the quicker I begin to line these two things up, thinking and feeling, the quicker I begin to actually stop and say, wow, I'm thinking something that's wrong. And the beauty is, I don't need to know what I'm thinking to know it's wrong. So my relationship to it is the simple admission of the thing I'm doing most obvious. That's the disturbance. And I can begin to live with it. And the knowing will come because I must know what I'm doing for it to be happening. Even if I think I don't know what I'm doing because I don't want to be blamed for it. I don't want to be faulted for it. I don't want to be so ashamed as to think I'm doing it. I still know what I'm doing to be doing it. Always.
And you know what's funny is somebody told me the other day, you're everything that I want. Like, you're the perfect person. I said, let me stop you right there.
Get rid of her.
I go, let me tell you something. If you think I'm the perfect person, I got to stop you right there. And I realize as I'm saying that, I would never say that, right? Because you're only in my world if you're saying that normally.
There's nothing to put a relationship at greater risk is to tell the other person that they're perfect. There's nothing that can create more doubt. Because generally, we know better than to think that in terms of the thinking we do in relation to the self. But in the other sense, Anthony, to mention that people are perfect in their essence actually is reaffirming and eliminates a lot of those.
Right. So she was right.
Self to argue over.
She was right.
Yes.
I love it.
The absolute reveals itself all the time, and only
that's what I should have told her. Well, babe,
for something
the absolute reveals itself all the time.
Incorruptible.
Jack, can you finish what you just said there?
Sorry,
the absolute reveals itself all the time, and then I got.
That's what I said.
No, you didn't, cheeky.
That's what he said.
Stop mucking about.
Well, you might have to re-listen to this because sometimes it just comes out and I don't have a very good track of it. But if the absolute reveals itself all that, it's not what we're thinking about ourselves. That we're generally in conflict over what I think the point was that generally what I'm in conflict with is what I'm thinking about things, not the things I'm thinking about. And in the relationships, I'm generally in conflict with who I think people are rather than who they are. And the forgiveness is starting to give them who they are as they are, which if they're absolute and infinite and complete and whole, when I begin to concede that, I start thinking of them in ways that I don't have the pettiness and the connection to and the insistence on seeing them in all those other thought-born ways. So, but you might want to listen back to that, Matthew.
The premise of entering or leaving a group of people, it's almost the interconnected tribalism of these thoughts. And from this premise, from this experience now, the revulsion on their faces where I'm going, no. It's like, don't want to play there. No.
Yeah, Janet calls them co-conspirators. That's her theory, that you only have co-conspirators around you. People that will go, yeah, you're right.
Well, to any degree that we play...
I didn't mean that, Anthony. I didn't mean that. That's your thinking about that.
What were you thinking? I'm sorry.
The revulsion, because this present is quite, it's illuminating, enlightenment. And when that is in a space where that's being denied, and you go, well, the truth is the truth, or the reality is the reality, they will try to stamp it out. And I remove myself from those places.
Oh, Jack will have something to say about that.
Coming up.
You know that about the removing yourself from the things?
Bingo.
Pizza's here.
So.
Pizza's here.
Come on, Jack. Let us hear it.
If we're seeing it in others, Matthew, we're thinking of them as doing what we would like to disavow we do by even seeing it in them. And it isn't because they're not doing what you're seeing, but what they're doing, what you're seeing is just sick. And for you to be seeing it, you must be doing it to know that. The difference is they might not see it. They might not see it as a sickness. They may still be seeing it as reality, and you're starting to witness it. You give them greater chance to begin to have perspective by beginning to concede what you're doing about what you're thinking about in relation to them by staying with them. Because if you're running from them, they're staying with you on your trail. That means the further you think you're running, the more they're chasing you. And you're creating the exact thing in another direction. Now, that is a step away from thinking that it's only happening when you're doing it and that nobody else is doing it. And when you start seeing them doing it and thinking it's separate from what you're doing, this begins to reveal the subconscious, seemingly subconscious thing, which is where I complain, where I contend. I keep all of the things I want to pretend I'm irresponsible for in the dark to say they're not there. Just like ghosts always seem to be there when the light's out when you're a kid, but they never seem to be there when the light comes on. And no matter how many times the light comes on, you still think they're there when it's in the dark. I've been playing that game still, thinking that those things I'm not doing are in the dark because I can say they're not there because I think they're subconscious when I'm watching them act on me by seeing these same things I say I'm not doing in others and not notice. I must be having them to see them. There is no color we can see that our eyes aren't designed to see. And if someone else can see a color that we don't see because our eyes aren't designed to see it, doesn't mean they're not seeing what they're seeing. It simply means that we're not seeing what they're seeing because they're seeing what they're seeing and we're seeing what ours.
And the scary part is that's not even your biggest problem because at least you're working on it, right? Like you have said, like if you're aware of it, you're fighting it. Well, at least you're aware. It's the problem you don't even know about. That's your bigger problem.
The size of the problem is irrelevant to the fact that we have any discontent at all. It's an indication that we're struggling. And to simply admit that admits all of the sizes and shapes and contours and textures and colors and things we've given credit to that don't exist simultaneously right now, period. Size is irrelevant.
There's no size or level of miracles.
If size matters,
the biggest one, people, biggest.
If size matters, it doesn't when it comes to delusion.
The miracle of being alive still, from whence I came, from a childhood, from a place of that. And sometimes I don't want to be amongst that. So I'm certainly not running from walking in a classy direction.
It isn't to suggest that we can't stop engaging in environments that are difficult, or it's not. It's kind of like saying that if you drink sour milk, you got to keep drinking it until you get used to it. No, you don't. It's not a requirement. The difference is one of them is a knee-jerk reactive reaction, which means reacting over and over and over again, thinking somehow that's the solution, rather than saying, I don't have any obligation to be with people that I don't particularly like. Because my sense is we don't struggle with love, we struggle with like. And what happens in my experience is I started to realize that the like was all limited thoughts, just preferences that I decided defined me in the thinking I was doing. And they didn't really define me. They just gave me more and more fodder to make believe I was more and more of what I thought. And all of a sudden I could go into those places and say, wow, this is a real opportunity to start to notice what I'm not doing, because I'm going to step into it rather than out of it. Mm-hmm. And it isn't to create a bigger problem, but it's to see what can I do about neutralizing the preoccupation I have and reactiveness and start to let it dissipate, which what I do when I take on challenge, when people say, would you do this? And I say, sure. I don't know what it means, but I know when I get there, I'll know what it means. And very often what it means is not what I expected. And so it gives me a chance just to stand into it. So what I face is all the limitations of the thinking. And as a result, all the somatic experiences, the fears, the doubts, all that stuff. And as I approach and continue to step into it, not by denying what I'm doing and running from what I'm doing, but saying, I'm doubtful, I have uncertainty. I obviously am recognizing these things. All of a sudden I'm doing and acting, and the purity of it all dissipates because I've actually walked through the misty fog of that notion. It's not solid. It's not real. I only solidify it to make believe that my thinking is correct. And concentrating on it, think of what a concentrate is. It's a reduction of something to its essence. So my concentrating on it, I think it really has essence because I'm focused on it so narrowly that I think all I'm seeing is all that it is, rather than, no, it's just more make-believe. It's more silliness. So to be laughed at, people normally don't like to be laughed at because they think that their cover's been blown because they're taking themselves so seriously as to think that self they're taking has any taking to be had. So as a result, has no giving to be given. So
Matthew, I have a master's degree in saying, oh, people, and I'm just going to avoid them. So that's why I found that so familiar. I'm behind 2 gates on 3.5 acres, surrounded by Hawaii state property. So I can go without seeing people for days and days at a time and be pretty peaceful. And then I go down to the market and I come back and I'm like, what the fuck? So I'm trying to get rid of that going out and doing the what the fuck thing and trying to just stay in the love. So don't take it personally, please.
And Jana, part of that is really recognizing that our natural state of awareness is an awakened state of meditation.
Yes.
And if the premise, if our premise wasn't peace, we would not know disturbance so well, and we would not think we saw so clearly what's wrong in others. We wouldn't see it. And isn't it interesting?
We wouldn't applaud ourselves so much for giving it up, too. It's like this big parade for ourselves. Yay, I've overcome this when we've created it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I just ran a race that I won.
Exactly.
It was 2 steps long, and I was the first one across the finish line.
Yeah.
When I'm thinking of it as something I'm not doing, I'm creating a problem by making believe things could be separate, could be alone, could be apart from.
I do feel like I'm still crying a lot, though.
Well, my sense is that to any degree you have stress in your body, you probably got some tears to relieve it. And that's what I have found. It actually seems to relieve the ice. Think of stress as a pretty tight, unflexible, like ice. It's solid. Here, water can be steam, a foggy notion at one end of the spectrum of its capacity as a liquid, and be frozen at the other end, like a rock. It's the same material, the same element, the same natural H2O. And yet it functions in different ways at different temperatures. The steam is above 212. It's actually above boiling, which is why it's steaming. And the cold can go down as cold can get. So it gets harder and harder and harder. What happens to the molecules as it gets harder is they go slower. What happens to our metabolism as we get more tension is it slows down. What do? We gain weight. Our body doesn't know how to burn the weight off. It doesn't know how to burn the energy. What do? Store it. It creates inflammation and concentration, pressure against our organs, and undermines our body's ability to function. So the relief is literally relieving ourselves, just like peeing, which I think is one of the most assured forms of relief I know on a daily basis. I can count on it.
Pee everywhere.
I can count on it. Remember the Rolaids used to say, "That's how I spell relief." Peeing is how I spell relief. I know for sure there's going to be some relief around the corner. So I wait and wait and wait. And then I'm like, oh boy. So that's maybe silly, but it's actually goes on in my day. So I was on a point that you were making, Jana, and missed it, but we have a lot we can do together in this conversation to begin to activate the conversation and start to notice that the things that are happening are actually happening, and also unravel some of the mythology and the superstition and the cultural seeming norms. I mean, think of cultures having been built essentially on things we thought were inherent to the culture, when in fact they're justifications for the wrong things we do, for the most part, to give us a reason to feel a part of everything when we've never been apart from anything.
The best part was the chameleon just pooped on command. The minute you started talking about relieving yourself, he just had like the largest poop. So yeah, there you go. He's listening.
Well, I would say if we are emotionally constipated, because the flow of light, like you mentioned earlier about enlightenment, Matthew, enlightenment, light and light means no weight. And light travels at light speed. And you know what's interesting about things traveling at light speed? Time disappears at light speed. So the enlightenment we're witnessing also lends some credence to the concept that the present state of our being, which is the only place we ever are, is not in space and time. It isn't between the past and future, because there is no place for the past or the future other than in thought. All that's happening now, in terms of time, is that things are changing. And right now, all the change that's ever been made is a culmination of the present moment. Everything, everywhere that has happened is represented right now. So we are the lineage of everything that has ever happened, and we are the legacy of everything that will happen. We become the legacy before the future. So I would say the world has some things that could be wrong with it or in it. I don't think it's the world, but what we're doing with it. And we could get better as a group, as a species, at talking about it. And silence is also witness to a knowing sense of fertile minds beginning to consider things so vast that there is nothing to say. So I just wanted to interrupt the silence with that comment. I love you guys. I like that we do this.
I love you.
And there's 168 hours in the week. It's the in-between time we get to practice this and try it on and exercise it and see what comes. Because the effects of what we think are going to always be present for us. And if we begin paying attention to them, we're beginning to actually realize what's happening. And that is, in fact, self-actualization and self-realization. But the self that's actually realized isn't one that condemns us, but is one we're freely able to re-choose and re-choose and re-choose and re-choose, rather than react and react and react and react to defend. Because there is no weight to it. There is nothing there other than what we think. It's just the self we're thinking about now. That's all. What I do, how I express myself. It's the sum total of all those things. It isn't something real. It's just a word used to describe the actions I'm taking, the choices I make, the thinking I do. It's alive and dynamic to that degree, but has no life of its own to condemn me. It can't attack me. There is no ego in it because it's an actual representation of what's happening rather than an illusory idea about reality and truth and being who I am. All that goes away. It just becomes the immediacy of the moment expressed in the immediacy of the moment. And I would suggest we've always been doing it. We have just been bifurcating, which I believe is a word that talks about segregation, and dissecting our fractured thinking in the fractured actions we've taken. And we have fractured bones and skulls in the process. Probably not our high point. But if what's done is done, and there's any benefit to all the horror, it would be admitting it today and starting to concede it is something that we have no obligation to continue to do. And if we do, we're choosing in some failed way to continue.
So there are no more petty grievances. It leaves a lot of space. It really does. Like you start going, well, maybe that could piss me off, and then you go, nah, that's just like a grievance. And you go through the inventory of it, and there's nothing there.
Isn't it funny after just talking about being pissed off and how much relief it is? We talked about getting pissed off. even language sort of reverses on it. It's like this idea that we get away with things. And in the thing we're talking about, to get away with it is to take it with us wherever we go. And so the idea of getting away with it is kind of insane because the faster we run, the quicker it comes with us, as though it has a life of its own rather than being created an idea we have about life.
I have to thank Laura Alice for being my co-conspirator in something. At one point you shared, and I hope you don't mind me saying it, she said that she was jealous, and that was just the thing that's part of her way of being, and she blurted it out and made it so real to us. And then I realized that was a huge part of my way of being, and it gave me permission to think about it and to bring it into the light and to unwind it, and to somehow now, maybe 8 months later, somehow feel the ease of it and to be free of it. And it seems like a petty grievance to me now, but it was so real previously. And I don't think I would have ever brought it to the light if you hadn't so gracefully just popped it out there. Like, we're all friends. It's okay to admit, my character defects. So I love you and thank you for that.
Oh, well, that's Jana, beautiful, Jana. That's the best part about these things is we see ourselves. Jack said it beautifully earlier, and I'm not going to say it as nicely, but we see who we are in relationship to others.
Yeah.
Right. That's what I gain every time I'm with you all, is I learn something about me by what you say that clicks. And it's just such a value of being in connection. That's something I can't do just by myself.
Well, there is no self to do it alone with. So
even if you wanted to.
So think about, we're all interrelated, right? So we're interrelating.
Yeah.
Right? Interrelating. It's a meld. It's an exchange. It's a transfer. It's a constant flow. And what is interreactiveness? It's expressing a reaction to what's happening rather than an interrelating to what's happening. And to think it's what we're doing when we're reacting is to simply see the impact thought can have on what's actually interrelating and turning it into something that feels condemned, seems condemned, and ends up having us act in ways that prove it's condemned because of the fact that we express ourselves in that same way, thinking others are to blame and at fault, rather than see them as the benefit that you're talking about in offering us the perspective. Single dimensional thought, thinking of itself, has no perspective. It is struggling to gain perspective by thinking alone, and that's disease. People drink alone because they think they're better off because nobody's contesting with what they're doing and saying, hey, you're killing yourself. What are you doing? How can you be at your third bottle of vodka? How can you be doing more and more and more of that stuff your friend just died from? Nobody's there, so we think we're right because nobody's contesting it, because we're so bent on what we know to be wrong in our thinking that all we think about is what other people think of us and use that as another consuming thing. That's crazy, when in fact everyone is offering us the perspective that naturally offers us the perspective. to see what we're doing and actually say, wow, I make so much, like you just talked about petty grievances. When I'm alone in my thinking, Jana, the pettiest grievance becomes everything I'm thinking.
Even bigger when you find a co-conspirator to rev it up. Hey, guess what?
I'll suggest when I do that, I'm using the whole world to blame in every respect, in every way, by thinking it's not me.
Exactly.
So now everyone has become my conspirator in my own thinking while I'm thinking I have nothing to do with it at the same time. Talk about a lack of proportion in terms of considering things.
Hitler had co-conspirators, and look what happened with that. I mean, it just takes people getting together, and we can raise the vibe. It's cumulative, or we can really go to hell with it.
But isn't it interesting that somebody like him would wait till he did all he did before he finally killed himself rather than do that in the beginning when he didn't get into art school?
Is that what it was all about?
It would have saved an enormous amount of grief. The point is that we tend not to kill ourselves until the point is we have nothing left to offer because we've been sick so long. We wait so long to notice that the thing we're doing has no value. It's never going to have any value. And we're trying to kill the self we think we are by stopping the thinking we're doing about it rather than simply say, this is a thought. How sick of me to make believe who I am is only what I think and make believe that killing my body is the best thing I can do to stop the thinking when in fact I'm scared to death to stop the thinking because the thinking is filled with so much fear and I don't know, I'm thinking it was something happening to me rather than being caused by me. And that transition diffuses all that stuff. People don't tend to get to that point where they think they're alone because they mention to somebody, you know what, I'm really struggling. Wow. How novel is that to just mention what you're actually doing? It's so crazy that we have gotten so far afield as to make believe that that is some elevated thing when we have been so depressed to even think that thought. So we are in a natural state of awakened meditation. If we didn't know the peace all the time, Anthony, if we didn't know the peace and only thought we didn't know the peace, it's the thinking again that's been causing the seeming lack of peace, but we wouldn't know the lack of peace if we didn't know peace. Just like we wouldn't know darkness if we didn't know light. It would be natural. And animals who live in pitch black environments tend not to see. They don't need it. But they tend to hear very well, and they tend to sense things very well, and they tend to be able to navigate perfectly in those environments without sight. So our capacity is improved by beginning to admit what we're actually doing because we're actually talking about what we're doing accurately rather than compounding it with thoughts that are inaccurate and wonder why we feel like we're struggling. It's very simple. And the world, if you haven't noticed, has always given us everything it had in every way it's given it to us to be able to be overused and abused in whatever way we have. And I'm not saying we have in every way, but in the ways we have, we certainly have, and poisoned and polluted and all that, and still keep giving. Everything we have today is still a product of this world that we are on. And we think the world has problems when it's our thinking about it and what we do in relation to it that we're not responsible for or don't act responsibly for while we're responsible for it and think of responsibly enough to actually do something about it that's responsible rather than argue over who should or shouldn't be doing it or whether or not it's happening. If we're arguing at a social level as to whether something's happening, it's a pretty good indication we're all each arguing individually in our own lives that what we're doing isn't what we're doing and shouldn't be happening. And as a result, something else should be happening. So wouldn't the debate pretty much boil down to each of us? And if I'm doing that at all, I'm doing it for everyone and I'm complimenting everyone in doing it. So my responsibility reveals itself in everything that's happening that's right and wrong, not just the things I want to take credit for. So if we didn't know this, we didn't know this, we wouldn't know it. And that peace as nature of something that is stable, that doesn't change, it's always the same, is so clear to us that we know quickly. And Jana, you were talking about this earlier in terms of addicts and all that being so aware of what's wrong. The fact that we're sensitive to it doesn't make people who have become desensitized and don't look like they're sensitive to it better off. It means they may just be better at denying what's actually happening in the name of thinking their life is so good because it's only aligning to what they've been doing the way they thought they should, when in fact that's probably the greatest illness on the planet that's caused more havoc because fewer people are deciding for everybody what should be happening rather than everybody deciding for everybody what should be happening, which we are in fact doing. We just don't think we are.
I don't even think there is hate. I think there's only fear. And I think that love, really the truth is that only love is real, but I just don't even think that there is hate. I think it's an illusion. And I think that people just get fearful and think that they can hate something. I don't even think people can be wrong. I mean, people...
but within the confines of thinking and applying the only things, you're right in the absolute sense, Jana, there is no fear in love. So it doesn't even exist.
Right.
So the fear comes in things that are at risk. What's at risk? Our body. Our body certainly doesn't last forever. So it's at risk. We can die sooner or later. That's the thing. We're dying. We're going to die. The question is when. And to think the question needs to be answered when we'll know certainly when it happens, or pretty quickly when it's about to, we don't need to wonder now. There's no need in that. The question is, why do we spend the time we have doing what we're doing and think that there's no wrong when in fact, if wrong is wrong, it's unapplicable. It has no applicable purpose. And I would say that is the distinction between function and dysfunction, good and bad, right and wrong, healthy and unhealthy, natural and unnatural. What's natural to nature is that it performs flawlessly according to its nature. What's unnatural is that we pollute it and steal its nutrients and think it should continue to perform. So when we do that in our own thinking, then we become useless because the actions we're operating on are based on thoughts that are useless and they have no function. So what is right applies, like in math. Think of math as an applied science, they call it in school. Why? Because you can apply the application and it will always work if it's applied properly, correctly. So the right and wrong in math is simply applying principles. What are the principles we know? Ultimately, love. What is love? Certainly not hate. Certainly not fear, certainly not doubt and uncertainty and instability. So all those things are coming from a thought process that isn't aligned with knowing our nature is love. Doesn't mean we have to actually express love in everything we do. There's a lot of people that don't like what I say.
Well,
I find that as a confirmation of rightness rather than thinking of it as wrongness, basically something I need to taper myself or become a chameleon to wrap around and help them feel better about what I'm thinking. Jenna, go.
Well, it's scary what you say. I mean, people have an identity of their petty, not even petty grievances, just their hurts and their disillusionments, and all of that is part of our human story. I mean, to just let all that shit go that you've been holding on to forever. I mean,
but to your point about it not really existing is we're only holding on to images we create to support the narrative that we're creating, to support the story that we're creating, because we're movie makers projecting, thinking the image in our brain is true and real because we keep developing it into more and more realistic forms and feelings, forms and shapes and colors and all that. You follow me?
Yeah.
We're actually creating the story to go along with the contention. There's nothing more to it than that. So when you're seeing it in others, you're seeing what you're doing, and I still see it, and I do this all day long to some degree. There's a lot of things I haven't realized. There's a lot of things I'm not aware of in terms of my thinking. I'm absolutely confirmed in my absolute nature of awareness and realization, but it hasn't revealed all the things I do so quickly and without thought to my experience yet to allow me to function on that level where this conversation could be more inclusive and more expansive. So there's limits I have in that. And I recognize those aren't yet choices, but I'm choosing to make believe they're not choices. So I'm feeling victim to them. I'm feeling shy of them. I'm feeling nervous about them. I'm feeling anxious about them. And when I step in a little deeper and a little further and say yes, normally what I want to say no to is anything that might expose the bullshit I'm perpetuating. So when I step into it, I get to say, oh, okay, this is going to be a chance to actually be in the face of things that might be doubtful in my own thinking, but it's the thinking I'm doing about them that's really doubtful, and it gives me a chance to get a little better, like we do in this conversation. I'd had this conversation for years with people on an individual level until I realized it really needed a broader audience to begin to have the perspective to confirm the natural state of this for everyone rather than a couple of people doing it in any isolated way. So, and my sense is we're just beginning to have this conversation, by the way. We've all been mulling and looking at all the stuff we do not to have it, or to think of it in terms of what we're thinking and our problems and our weak and our good and our bad and all that,
Yes.
rather than say, oh, wow, this isn't about me. This is about us. This is about everybody. This is about everything.
I think that's it right there. When I stop thinking about me or trying to conjure up things that will put me back into my uncomfortable zone that I'm so familiar with, I start going like, well, isn't this a problem? Or isn't that a problem? Or if this happened, I'd be at ease. And I think
that's what Anthony was talking about too this week, Jenna.
Well, yeah, and that's what started this conversation in my brain.
Exactly what I was saying.
Yeah. So again, the things we think we do individually, we're actually all doing collectively, but pretending we're doing them individually so we can think if we don't mention it to anybody, we're not doing it. The same way that if we don't look at a problem, we think it doesn't exist because we're not looking at it.
Well, that's true though, right?
That's like 3-year-old thinking. That's like peekaboo as an adult. You know, my sense is people get bitter with age because they're not maturing like fruit matures. It is not good to eat an unripe apple. So if we're not maturing, we're not ripening, we're not getting sweeter. What we say comes off with a bitter taste in our mouth. And people don't want to swallow that stuff. They don't want to hear that. And it is natural to react to those sorts of things. We're designed to know when something's wrong by what it tastes like, because it tells us if it's bitter and poisonous, that it's not good to eat for the most part, or if it's sour like milk. We know it in the conversations we have. We can feel it. We talk about swallowing the bitter pills. You know, we're talking about it openly and yet not thinking. Watch the words you use and you'll start seeing better the thoughts you have about the things you're saying. Because a lot of it won't make sense when you start looking at it and saying, what the hell am I even talking about? And I would say, hell. So I love you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jack.
You're welcome to join us. If you send an email and a name, we'll put you on the list, and you're welcome to come and share and interact and be with us. And just being present we do this live on Zoom, but we don't promote the audio or the visual on Zoom because 2 reasons. Anonymity is the core of the traditions in sober programs, to keep people's relationship as individuals and personalities detached from the organizations, so we don't do anything to minimize their capacity to serve and help people. But the greater sense of anonymity is to begin to realize that it is a faceless, that principles before personalities means that principles precede the things we think about who we are. And they are the basis of our existence. And so a faceless presentation allows the listener to think about what we're saying rather than how we look saying it, and rather than the distraction of wondering why I'm wearing what I'm wearing and do what I do in terms of visibility. You can do whatever you want and continue to listen openly. So we do that for that reason, and also to be able to discuss all of our 12-step experience, which many of us have had and have been the basis for some of this awareness that is beginning to develop, if not all of it. So you're always welcome to email, and we will not spatter you with junk mail. Love you guys.
Mahalo, love you. Aloha.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
All that are, all that is.
Bye, Chameleon.